Chapter 31. The Hot Black Summer. If Harry could describe that summer in a word, it would be black. If he used two, he would add the word hot. Because vampires burned with a heat unrivaled by any creature save, perhaps, a dragon. Locked in his laboratory with the vampire Brendan and his bonded servant Hill, that heat built to almost unbearable levels, a furnace of raging power and danger and hunger. Because in that room, Harry learned that Brendan wanted to eat him alive. Wanted to split his skin open and eat his flesh and drink his blood and wallow in his power as it spilled to the floor in rippling floods. He saw as much in the vampire's mind when their power crashed together, when Harry's emerald strength held the carbon black flesh down and began to twist and break and repair and tear apart again, when his mind touched another mind. Both of them twisted together as Harry burrowed inside another being and tried to change it from the inside out. Harry saw it when he held Brendan's heart in his hand. The chest split open, carbon black ribs spearing up into open air, shadowed blood running across his emerald fingers. Brendan not breathing because the vampire didn't have to and never had in his life, only laying there in agony, holding himself still the same way he constantly held himself still and didn't tear out Harry's throat with the desire to feed and be alive, if only for a moment, alive and strong and whole. Harry looked at that heart and compared it to Hill's, the wizard mercifully dead at the time and unaware of the turmoil in the room, the oppressive heat and hunger and power, and saw what made a vampire heart wrong, how the organ didn't pump but lay dead, flesh not decaying, and yet not growing, not alive. And he took the pattern of undeath and made it live and put it back into Brendan's body, and watched as the vampire howled and bucked, and time warped around them. A concave thing with teeth that gnashed and bit and tore. The heart, of all organs it would be the heart the piece that held the vampire in immortal stasis. The heart that refuses to run blood through the body, and yet still did so. It would only move another's blood and black shadow, not the color inside the black, the color that lay deep inside Brendan's brain. The brain, that other missing piece of the puzzle. The piece he had found first, that first month, when he meticulously explored every part of the vampire's body and tried to isolate the catalyst that fractured the pattern as a whole. While exploring, he learned that Brendan would not faint at unbearable pain, couldn't faint because vampires couldn't sleep, couldn't rest, couldn't close their eyes and stop. And maybe that, as much as the long years that passed them by, was part of their memory woes. And inside the brain, behind black hairless flesh and hard black bone, lay a sapphire blue ocean, a color that hurt his heart to see locked inside a carbon void, unable to escape, unable to taste freedom. A soul was there, locked inside of the body it should possess, a soul unable to die because its host was not dead, unable to live because its host was not alive. Trapped, a bird in a wire cage, singing desperately for freedom. He had wanted to rush then. Wanted to take every moment he had and save that soul. Release it. For one horrible hour he considered destroying the vampire entirely, letting that blue soul go into death where it could be sent out to live again, free this time, unchained. Hermione had saved him from that decision, dragging him from his laboratory when 1 hour turned into one night turned into a week, when Creature told her he hadn't eaten at all while she was gone at her apprenticeship. She pushed him into a green chair and made him speak, then held him while he cried from frustrated anger and sorrow and simple exhaustion. He had slept 2 days away, under the cloak's starry sky, the stone hot on his palm as he dreamed of a nexus of light, hues spinning off a burning ball of every color imaginable, a world of iridescent rainbows, beautiful and wonderful, the best dream in the world. When he woke up, he didn't rush, and he didn't kill Brendan. He welcomed the vampire and his bonded from the flu, and took them inside his laboratory, cleaned of blood and other things by Kraken. Kraken, who had also picked him off the floor when he collapsed from expending the power that had torn Brendan apart. Then put him back together again the previous time in a long line of times. And though he now knew the true color of Brendan's soul, it had taken more weeks of careful dissection and experimentation to see the broken heart at the center of it all, the center of a pattern that multiplied outwards from that core organ. The heart like a base number in a fraction, a symmetrical mathematical calculation. Change that number, the sum changes. Change that number, and you change the whole. So he held Brendan's heart and felt that hunger and that heat. Held it in his right hand, the stone burning back into that fire, a cold heat he felt inside of himself. And he looked at Hill's heart, the Exora lifeless on the table beside the one he knelt over, and saw where everything went wrong, how the problem all came back to this one thing. This undead heart that he made live, his own emerald power sinking into it, and taking what was broken with dark white light, and watching with panting breaths as it beat. One heavy pulse, as Brendan sucked in air and screamed and screamed and screamed. Another heavy pulse that lasted a minute, an hour, an infinite building of energy that made the wards of his laboratory expand and begin to crack. Then that pulse spilled over, and with the shock of energy that pushed Harry away from the table, sapphire blue life flooded, a continuous wave. Beat, beat, beat. The vampire went silent, and abruptly time returned to its normal pace, Harry's harsh exhalations alone in the room, until Brendan breathed again, gasped in air like a man desperate and drowning, shadowy blue hands raising to clutch at his chest, which Harry didn't remember closing but must have. At some point in between the moment time stopped, and time began again. Carbon black skin going to blue, that deep rich hue so pure he ached to look at it. The vampire sat up, and Harry made himself look at the pattern and catalogue it. It wasn't entirely human, the same way a vela wasn't entirely human. There were threads of black there, a triangular fracture across chest and face and hands. Nails and teeth not blunt but sharp, a face a little too symmetrical, ears a little too large. Hill! Brendan commanded suddenly, and Harry remembered the dead body in the room. Without turning his focus away, he sent a whip of emerald light to stir the wizard back to life with a gasp of his own. Between vampire and bonded, there still looped a length of black power, perhaps stronger than ever. Hill sat up with a groan. What Abraxas kicked me in the chest. Hill, whose human pattern he could see now bore hints of the same vampiric fracture Brendan possessed, only it was consolidated over his heart alone, like a handprint. A brand that says, I belong to someone, and that makes me worth more than you. And a warning, for the Lawrence Hill that Harry had gotten to know over the last weekends was not the same nervous aura he had met before. His power was greater, as was his speed and reflexes, his flesh and bones, his strength and courage. What the vampiric bonding process did to the recipients was a two-way street, a symbiotic relationship. Lawrence. Brendan's voice was soft, changed. It was deeper, held more volume inside of it, coming up from inside his chest in a way it never had before, air expelled with more than one purpose. This was what Brendan was meant to sound like. No way. Hill had turned at the sound of his name, was gawking openly at the vampire. You look, describe him. Harry commanded immediately, pleased when the wizard complied, his voice awed. His skin is still pale, but I can see blood. I can see blood under the skin, just like a normal person. His eyes are black like before, but the center part, the pupil, Harry supplied helpfully. Yes, it's white, like the opposite of a human eye, and yet his face looks human. I can't describe it. I'll take a sample of your memory. Harry mused, straightening his ruffled clothes, annoyed at the weariness he could feel in his bones. To compare. Brendan stretched out his hands, looked down at his fingers, reached a hand up to run over his face. I'm changed. Brendan sounded as tired as he felt, but also just as exhilarated. Not less than I was, but more. Like a barrier that used to be there is gone. The barrier of immortality. Harry said simply, saw the flicker of surprise in a sapphire blue soul. You will no doubt have a longer lifespan than a typical human, perhaps similar to other humanoid species. 300 years, half a millennium, hard to say, but you will die. I can remember 1,000 years of life. Things I've forgotten for over a century, the vampire said after a moment. Twice as many memories as I could recall before today. I remember my mother, her face, her touch. I have a sister out there. Or again in sorrow as well. What's the point of living forever if I won't remember it? How many others will feel that way? Harry questioned. I doubt your abilities are the same either, not the same level. I will want to test that. The hunger is greatly decreased. Brendan stretched his fingers again, clicking his long nails together absently. But you are correct. I can sense a new limit to my strength. I feel tired, which would be a new sensation for a vampire. We will meet tomorrow. Think on your decision. Decision? Brendan sounded confused, and Harry folded his arms, swaying slightly. He was ready to lay down, perhaps for an entire year. You are not human, but as close to it as you can get and still be. Harry waved one hand towards the vampire, masked a yawn with the other. You, a vampire, you are mortal. You have to decide if that's what you want, and more, if this is something you want to offer to others of your species. Now that I know what needs to be done, I can refine the process to be much less rigorous, take less time. Perhaps unlock several at the same time. Unlock. He liked that word for the process. Unlocking the humanity inside the monster, letting it evolve from a broken pattern into the whole one it was meant to be all along. What I feel now, is something I would never give away again. His voice was firm, concrete. But the ramifications for my coven is something that would need to be discussed with others of my kind. My kind. The vampire breathed deeply, testing out his lungs as he had tested the claws on his fingers. I have a sense of self I did not possess before. I no longer exist as part of a whole, but for myself. I feel my bond with them as I do with Lawrence, but it does not define me nor leash me as I now know it did before. I feel like a revelation. All right, was all Harry has to say in response. He was more than tired now. He was beginning to mentally falter, his mind following his body to weakness. Tomorrow, then. Yes. Brendan strode forward with motions too quick to be human, steadied Harry when he swayed a second time. Rest, friend. You have given me a gift I can never repay. Oh, Harry figured that was a pretty good reply, seeing as how his legs were going weak. Well, and with that last word, Harry found his awareness fading into darkness as he collapsed right into the arms of the oldest vampire in Britain. Kraken fussed over the master, bulbous eyes narrowed in unease as the dark creature laid him down onto the soft cushions of the couch. Kraken will seize you out now, he said forcefully as the vampire rose to its full height, though it didn't look quite like a vampire at the moment. A trick if Kraken ever saw one. Beside the house elf, Crookshanks, fur arched notably, the old cat's growl low and sinister. The vampire didn't spare the cat a glance as he spoke. Inform him we will return next weekend to speak with him. We both need the extra day's rest. By the fireplace, the other wizard nodded as he waited, this one much more tolerable than his companion. Kraken will let Master know. The vampire turned and glided away, vanishing into the flue moments later. Then Kraken straightened his shoulders and took hold of the Master with his own house-elf magic, much more superior a force than that of vampires, and with gentle movements brought his Master up to his room. 2 months, and Hermione was finally allowed to brew a real potion. She had read over a dozen volumes on magical flora and fauna. She had spent weeks chopping and dicing and skewering, dissecting and extracting, and basically getting her entire self filthy in the process, over and over. And when she finally was deemed properly skilled in ingredient preparation, she was set to brew basic potions. One after another after another. Potions she thought she could brew in her sleep, they were so simple. Except they weren't, when Severus Snape taught them. Because he didn't care so much that she did it right than that she knew why she got it right. And he insisted she learn 3 different ways to get the same result with alternative ingredients or processes for each potion. Over a month of this. Brewing hair removal and hair growth potions, skin color change concoctions, and basic healing tonics. Potions to make an enemy grow warts, or potions to make a relative lose them. Tweaking finite amounts of ingredients to reverse properties, learning antidotes to common poisons, and then learning what made the poison toxic. Learn how to kill someone, and you will learn how to not kill them in the process. Snape had said once, when he read her disdainful expression on the topics of said poisons. And by learning what is toxic to the human body, you will learn what is not. Both are things you must know if you are to ever experiment and create your own potions. How he knew that she wanted to do just that she wasn't sure. It was almost like the man could read minds, which, knowing what she knew of magic, and of Snape in particular, wasn't too out of the realm of possibility. But now, finally, she was brewing something difficult, and something she herself found fascinating. The wolfsbane potion. Snape was working on refining the potion, and in order to do so needed multiple samples of the potion. Given the high price of wolfsbane, it was much more efficient to brew the thing himself. And now that she was deemed worthy, that task was passed on to her. Under his supervision initially, of course. Which meant she now also had another 2 volumes to read. One on werewolves, which she had already read in her own research, but wasn't going to inform Snape of such, and another on flora that had properties reliant on planting or harvesting during certain lunar cycles. Hermione skipped into Grimmauld Place with a crack of apparition, her steps bouncing with excitement. Harry would be thrilled if she could get him to sit down for a few minutes and listen to her anyway. Some of her joy dimmed, and she scowled around the sitting room. She understood how busy he was on the vampire project. She was busy herself, but she did set aside a few hours a day at least to do something other than work. Harry, on the other hand, only seemed to carve out time for the vampire in the past weeks, though it wasn't only her who was feeling neglected. The Weasley twins had had to camp out in their kitchen for an entire day to catch Harry actually sitting down to eat long enough for them to discuss the manufactory initiative, which she was just as desperate to get involved in as the twins. Petunia Dursley had threatened yesterday to kidnap her nephew so she could make sure he was still alive. Vaughn was getting sick of lounging at Grimmauld Place like another piece of furniture, and thrice Hermione had had to turn Ethan away, the dour Asian woman's scowl making even Hermione nervous. But Harry was, technically, a civilian specialist who only worked under contract for the ministry. He wasn't obligated to show up every time he was summoned. In her honest opinion, Harry was in no shape for combat anyway. He was growing thinner by the week, expanding enough magical power on weekends to make him physically ill for days afterward. Days which he spent poring over papers, writing notes, and viewing memory loops of his experiments the weekend before. She had tried, she really had, to view those with him, but she couldn't stomach the sight of so much blood and gore, nor that of Harry killing and reanimating a human being, over and over, nor the sight of the various cadavers that had appeared with mysterious efficiency from a local morgue in the dead of night, no doubt delivered by Kraken and returned in the same manner before any mundane or magical authorities could notice. He said it was easier to deal with a corpse without the distraction of a heartbeat and pumping blood. Hermione had tried to tell herself it was just like a coma, but it wasn't, and she just couldn't. So she backed off, and Harry had only sunk deeper into his single-minded experiments. And by looking at his notes, she knew he was close to being finished. Knew that to stop him now would not help him, only needlessly draw out the process. But she wanted to. She really, really wanted to. Every time she helped him into bed too late at night, exhausted and heavy-lidded, arms limp. Every time she forced him to eat at least 2 meals a day, every time she saw the lines on his face. Every time she thought about the hints her mother had dropped after a conversation with Petunia months ago, hints she was now beginning to think were only unfounded hopes. A pop of teleportation, and Kraken was in front of her, long fingers twisting together as he dipped into a brief bow. "Miss Hermione, the master is in bed." Hermione glanced at her timepiece, frowned. It was close to dusk. Brendan would be arriving at any moment. "That vampire will not be his until next week, miss. The master has made a breakthrough." Hermione's heart leapt, and she suddenly forgot her previous dissatisfaction as she jogged for the stairs, bag tossed on one couch cushion. The house. Elf watched her go with a satisfied nod. The miss would take care of the master. Harry woke to her light, shining out of her in that familiar blue-violet hue. She lay curled beside him on top of the cloak, looking for all the world like she rested on a bed of stars. The hand curled under her cheek twitched as his eyelids lifted, and he saw light bend and curve into a smile as she saw he was awake. "Kraken told me you made progress." Harry returned that sleepy smile with a satisfied one of his own. "The heart, the center of the vampiric body's pattern, much like what I now know is true of humanity. Like the core of the earth, the unseen thing that makes all other things possible. Change it, and everything else responds outward from there." She touched a lock of his hair and moved it off his face in a gentle movement. Is he mortal now? Harry thought about that a moment, his mind still tired with the contented haze of a job well done and successful. I'm not sure immortal ever described vampires. They could always be killed, but time will affect him now. He will age, if at a slower rate. Hermione's fingers were warm, but no longer as soft as they once were, the calluses from her potions work having roughened the edges of her digits. He found himself mesmerized by the sensation of her touch, so familiar and yet so abruptly different. And his unique abilities. He was finding himself sliding back into sleep again, the lights hazy about him, blending together in ways they shouldn't. The black white of the cloak so smooth over him, and under her, shadows of light waiting to gently bring him under. We will test them. He thought he said that, but later he couldn't remember if he had said it aloud or only thought it. He just remembered her soft lips against his cheek, her warm breath on his neck, long hair, a tickling sensation against his exposed face. Sleep, love. And he did sleep, just like that, her voice in his ear, and the scent of her his entire world. Vampires had been his obsession throughout the entire project of restoring the broken pattern at the heart of their race. He had learned about their ability to mask magical use, as well as the limits of the time fluctuations they employed. It was a technique that had gradually been discovered in the last millennium, and one only the eldest dared risk without help from many coven members. Slowing time tended to expend a great deal of life energy which they carried in the form of mortal blood. Brendan was one such elder, a vampire with extraordinary control for his race. He had learned about their family structures, how an entire coven of 20 to 100 vampires might convene on a night of their choosing and pair off 2 by 2 for a year or a decade, or just a single night. How a child might be born, very rarely, exactly 3 years after such a pairing, the gestation period more kin to that of elephants than humankind. How a vampiric infant would die without the blood of both mother and father for a period of 7 years. How in its childhood it would scream and wail in an agony that a parent could never quite soothe, inconsolable, as it sought something indefinable and hopeless. Laughter was not found often in vampire covens, as all minds constantly sought out the one thing that gave them relief from pain and forgetting, the blood of the witch and wizard that could be convinced to legally bond with them, versus an illegal bloodletting that might send the ministry down on their heads. And such bonded people would go through their own mutation once the blood sharing was first done. The humanity of their pattern a little wrong in a lot of places, fractured outward the way it was said a quartz would fracture light into many colors. Bonded were strong, their hearts larger than they should be, their blood both richer, and yet lacking the distinctive red color and copper odor of human blood. To Harry, bonded blood looked exactly as it should, the liquid light of a soul, spilling out from the body it inhabited when the skin was cut. Hermione was the one to describe the phenomenon to him in the fascinated tones of a scholar witnessing a miracle, something no one else had studied in modern memory. But those bonded always died as all humankind died, and with them would go a portion of the stored memories of the vampire that had been a part of them. There were never enough bonded for an entire coven. There was always pain and the loss of knowledge. Bonded could not have children of their own. They became sterile as soon as the process was completed. So new bonded would be courted and wooed, with promises of long life and wealth and safety and power. Thus had went the cycle of vampire covens, perhaps only 10,000 members scattered across the world, few and far between, most far too busy surviving themselves than worrying about each other, until word trickled out of Britain that there was a one. A bandit had overheard another bandit, who told a vampire lover, who told a child, who told a friend, and on it spread, that there was a wizard who could see, who had filled the empty dead spaces inside of them with something alive and permanent and all their own. A soul, one vampire said to another. A life, a bandit whispered without us. Death, hissed in low, angry tones. That's what this would mean. No one believed it at first, not truly. The prophecy was so old no one believed in it anymore. It was a story, hope to give to the young ones when they could still remember the parents who birthed them. There was no one, no door. They were simply what they were, the bloodsuckers of the world, the bottom feeders who lived on the poor and the stupid whom most hated and everyone secretly feared. Until the leader of the British coven travelled across the Channel to France one night, and on from there to Spain, and the leaders of both covens afterwards were oddly silent and introspective, speaking of legends to their closest confidants, asking their loved ones what was more important to them. To live forever, dimly like a candle flickering in a dark room, or live for a time burning brightly as the sun and just as full of life. A room full of vampires was full of heat, their forms letting off warmth the way a mundane fluorescent bulb would, their own special brand of magic playing by its own rules. But when the vampire from Britain entered the main courtyard of the Spanish Coven's home ground in Seville, it was like a ripple went through that heat, a discord note in a well-known song. He was a little too bright, a little too slow, a little too living to be one of them. He was not them. He was not part of the whole any longer. It was as obvious as the fangs in their mouth and the claws on their fingers. All saw it, and all spoke of it, and the spark of rumor grew into the raging flames of revolution as the moon rose and fell again, and the ancient British vampire left Spain within less than an hour, moving on with all the speed of his race. Germany, next, inexplicably appearing at the door, a vampire who was not a vampire. Then Austria and Italy, Greece and Romania, and on it went until most of the European covens knew that it was happening. It had happened, just as Libero had promised in the times before any left could remember. The bonds of immortal blood broken until only a vampire remained, alone and whole, and possessing that indefinable thing most labeled a soul. The thing that made one unique among all others, gave one memory and emotion and personality. A firestorm of hope erupted, and yet also fear, fear of the unknown and of change. The status quo turned upside down and shaken out, and where fear was, irrationality reigned. It took 3 days for Harry to feel completely like himself again. It hit him hardest to realize just how much time had passed. New school semesters would be starting far too soon, and the third quarterly meeting of the Wiesengamot was only weeks away. And in the corner of his sock drawer, a ring box waited for him to find his courage where it was inexplicably hiding. He wasn't afraid of her father, per se. He just wanted the stern man's approval. But some tiny part of him was afraid that Hermione would turn him down. Not because she didn't love him, because she did. He knew that as strongly as he knew his own magic. But because she didn't feel the same urge he did to make their connection as public and permanent as magically possible. He rather liked the old wizarding traditions, bands of magic spoken in audible spells that wove a couple together for their lifetime. Vaughn said such rituals had fallen out of fashion decades ago, along with betrothal contracts and dowries. And if Hermione said no to his proposal of marriage, Harry would be hurt despite the internal lectures he gave himself to the contrary. Any explanation she gave would be completely logical and rational and impossible for him to argue against. He had tried to map out how such a conversation might go, and those conversations were what had led him to tucking the ring away out of sight and almost out of mind, until he could face the uncertainty straight on and go for it anyway. Now that the distraction of the vampires was temporarily resolved, for a little while at least, he felt he needed to do something. Which was what led Harry to his current position, standing next to Hermione in the Granger's kitchen, wondering how he was to possibly get Mr. Granger alone for 5 minutes or better, yet an hour, to talk the man around to Harry's way of thinking. Mainly, that marriage was a wonderful institution and quite common, and Harry was quite a good catch considering he wasn't jobless or a homeless or a generally annoying person. Hermione was the love of his life, and the one for him, and he would treat her like she was a princess, because as far as he was concerned, she already treated him far better than he deserved. Mrs. Granger was talking about something, a patient he gathered when he could bring himself to pay attention, going on and on while Hermione demonstrated her rather stellar food preparation skills as the two women cooked up something between them on the stove. Mr. Granger was sitting on a high stool pulled up to the counter, a fragile green newspaper spread open before him, pages occasionally rustling as a page was turned. Harry just stood there, feeling like an indecisive idiot. Should he ask the man for a word? Would that be too obvious? Perhaps ask to be shown something in the man's office. Except what would that be? Hermione would be instantly suspicious. He could excuse himself to check the wards. But how to get Mr. Granger's company on such an endeavor, and why would he want it? Another rustle, as the paper was lowered to the table and Mr. Granger stood. A fission of panic rushed through him. He had to say something. What? What to say? Was the man leaving? Did he have to go back to the office for some reason? I was wondering if you could take a look at his for me, Harry. The man's voice was casual in the abrupt silence that fell at his words. He's looking a little under the weather. Oh, Harry said, dumbfounded at the sudden opportunity falling right into his lap. Sure. Hermione and her mother picked their conversation back up as the two men left the room without question, and he breathed a sigh of relief. Perfect. This was perfect. It was almost like the older man knew what Harry was up to. Mr. Granger led him into his office, where a familiar brown cat lounged across the middle of a towering floor-to-ceiling cat tree, carpeted surfaces dusted with occasional tufts of brown fur. Fur, like hair, did not pulse with life. It was dead, after all, but it still held that color of genetic property, like a flat picture of a bird instead of a bird itself. Same color and shape and pattern, and yet lacking the property that made it move and breathe and sing. Harry went to hiss and spit, the cat much more tolerant than it had been in its youth. It allowed his touch, Harry keeping the contact to the places he was sure the feline wouldn't reward him with a swat for. Silence grew in the room, and Harry abruptly realized that there was absolutely nothing wrong with the cat. He was older, certainly, his life a steady beat of old age, but his pattern was whole and undeceased, his light bright and his fur smooth and untangled under his hand. Mr. Granger sat in his worn office chair, the leather creaking at the motion. "Hiss looks fine." Harry tentatively began. "That's good," Mr. Granger replied. More silence as Harry pet the cat and tried to remember all the ways he was supposed to begin this conversation, but couldn't quite recall in the moment. That is, I wanted to ask you." Harry drifted off, mentally wanting to kicking himself. "Something. Oh," there was a thread of amusement in the man's tone. "What's that?" "Oh, well," Harry began again. "I was thinking." "Thinking is always encouraged," was the response when Harry drifted off again. Definitely amusement this time. Harry stiffened his spine. It was now or never. "I planned to ask Hermione to marry me, and I wanted to inform you first and gain your support." That sounded good. Harry gained his confidence as he saw no large flickers of surprise in the man's steady navy blue hue. "She values your opinion and would want your blessing." Mr. Granger chuckled, standing to walk towards the cat tower. Hiss arched his back with a feline sound of appreciation when the older man gently ran his fingers across his triangular brown head. "She wanted, yes, though I highly doubt my daughter would let the lack of it stop her." Harry shifted uneasily. "She loves you." Navy blue hands lifted the cat into his arms, cradling the contented creature as its purr echoed audibly into the air. "And I love her. She means the world to me and her mother. But she's her own person, and that person is quite stubborn." He said the last with a rueful laugh. "Anyone with eyes can see she wouldn't let anything stand between you and her." Harry tried to keep the smile off his face, and failed miserably. "I feel the same." "Good." Mr. Granger returned to his seat, hiss a brown ball of light across his chest. "That's why I'm rather relieved myself that you want to take this step. It's a big one, a big responsibility. Can't be taken lightly, and there's not many boys your age I would think are ready for it. But you've always been something special." Harry grinned wryly. "Special is just another word for odd in my experience." "Well, you're that too," Mr. Granger laughed. "And since I'm her father, I can say my daughter is mighty special herself with a good dash of odd along with it. You two fit together very well. I'll take that as a compliment." Harry bounced on his feet, energy buoying through him on waves of relief and excitement. "Thank you, sir." The older man waved him away. "Surely you didn't expect me to stand in your way. You're practically part of the family already. This would just make it official." "Still, thank you." Harry looked down at his gloved hands, suddenly awkward. "It means a lot to me." Mr. Granger rose, placing Hiss down gently, the older cat looping through his legs once before sauntering away. "Since Hiss is doing all right after all, how about we go put the ladies out of their misery?" Harry frowned. "Pardon." Navy blue lights split into what might have been a smile or a grimace. "Surely you don't think they're oblivious to what we're up to in here, do you?" Harry blinked rapidly. Yes," he laughed. "You might as well learn this now, son. Women are almost always a step ahead. My wife has been hinting to me for almost 2 months that you might be approaching me. About drove her to distraction that you've waited so long. Hermione and her have had their heads together, too, whispering and whatnot. Didn't you notice the lack of meddling when we two walked out just now?" Well, that had been odd. Hermione hadn't even seemed concerned that Hiss might be under the weather. He'd been too worried about himself to consider that oddity, though. "She's known for 2 months." Harry frowned, did the mental calculations, and groaned. "Aunt Petunia." Mr. Granger laughed. "No doubt, though really a marriage proposal shouldn't be a true surprise anyway. Maybe the time and place of it, but not the thought behind it." Harry sighed, smiled. "I'm a little relieved she's on to me, to be honest. We've talked about getting married, a family, and all of that, but always as if it was a long way into the future. I wasn't sure she would agree. Blue's shoulders lifted in a wry shrug. Who says she'll say yes the first time? Harry paused at the threshold of the office door. First time. A rich baritone laugh. I asked her mother 3 times. And with that last nugget of information, John Granger strode out of the room ahead of him, whistling. Dudley's apartment was as cluttered as ever, the familiar smell of old takeout wafting from the tiny kitchen to where they sat on the couch, Harry across from his cousin and his cousin's childhood friend. Piers, a brown soul, was untangling the wires of a new gaming console spread out across the floor like wiry black snakes. Harry had arrived in the middle of the 2 men's rapturous unwrapping of a PlayStation, a muggle form of video game console that Harry had only vaguely knew existed. Super sale right now, given the things have been out a couple years. Piers had announced. Got it and a few games. Going to play now before the semester hits and Duds doesn't have time anymore. The last was said with a pointed tone, though his cousin only shrugged large shoulders carelessly in response. I came for more advice. Harry began, though why he thought his cousin could help he wasn't sure. Dudley hadn't had a steady relationship since he began college. On proposing, Piers choked back laughter, the sound coming out more like a snort. He wasn't the only one who thought Dudley was by no means an expert on the subject. Harry, come on. Dudley sighed long and hard. I've already told you. Take her somewhere nice and pop the question. Easy. I told you that months ago. Harry leaned back in his chair, gloved hands absently tapping the armrests of his chair. I don't know what to say. You're not sure anymore. Change your mind. Dudley's question brought instant denial from him. No, of course not. Nothing's changed. Nothing with how he felt about her in any case. But his experiments had taken a toll on him and her both, and he hadn't liked seeing how worried she was for him. It was something to realize that everything he did could and would have an effect on her, either minor or major. That living your life with someone could be a selfish act, and one partner or the other often got the better end of the deal. He couldn't make her happy all the time, just as she couldn't make him happy all the time. They sometimes aggravated each other, sometimes needed their own space. His idea of what a marriage might be was changing the longer he lived with her, and began to understand what living together forever might entail. It hadn't changed what he felt, not one iota, only broadened his understanding of what love really was. It wasn't just the color of a soul, or the sound of a voice, or the rush of heat from skin against skin. It was all those moments, building one upon another, where 2 people told each other their dreams and memories, their feelings and fears. Moments of shared joy and shared grief, a deep understanding of one another's heart. He just didn't know how to tell her how he felt when he already told her he loved her, almost every single day. He wasn't sure he knew what love really was the first time he told her, and yet he felt he had loved her since he first saw her bright blue-violet soul at the edge of his vision. What a paradox it was. Harry, earth to Harry. He blinked, realized Dudley held out a stiff rectangular piece of paper. What's this? His cousin's smile was in his voice. A florist, one of my buddy's mum, swears she's the best. Go buy some roses or something and ask your girl before you die of old age or I get sick of you moping about my apartment. He grinned reluctantly and accepted the offering. Thanks. Dudley flopped back onto the couch and accepted a shadowy box of electronics from Piers. What's family for? Now get out of here unless you want to hear me slaughter Piers here. As if, the other man muttered. You wish. And before he even rose to his feet, the sound of automatic gunfire filled the apartment. He didn't go to the florist. He went to Gringotts, Von a silent shadow at his elbow. Shrew was sitting at his purple stone desk, the goblin manager not the least surprised when Harry entered his office and took a seat. The wide door shut with a solid thunk, leaving them both alone in the square room, its walls decorated with metal in the shape of shining weaponry. Goblins were a warlike race, and seemed to thrill in making other beings who entered their domain wary. So, the goblin queried, You're going to move forward. In a moment of quiet that summer he had sent a detailed owl to Shrew, dealing with his desire to invest in Muggle medical research companies. He had given no reason for this desire, and the goblin hadn't asked. Perhaps, with knowledge of Harry's other investments, an intelligent mind could figure it out for himself. Goblins dealt with the Muggle world through Muggle-born contacts, a fact most were not aware of. They had to have people who existed in both worlds and understood both as well. Banking was a complicated business, and one he was glad to not have to deal with. But goblins liked to make money, and there was a lot of money to be made in the mundane world. Of course, goblins would grow rich off just that knowledge and create the network to make such possible. So it was only a matter of asking the right goblin the right questions. In this case, the goblin was his manager, and the question was simple. Can you find me a contact in the Muggle world who knows what I am and can help me build the company I want to build? Shrew no doubt considered that company a budding financial empire, one he could get rich off of being involved in. Harry thought instead of a bridge, the opportunity that might bring two worlds together. He had found a need in the mundane world and had an idea of how to fill that need with magical technology in such a way to not bring harm to the magical world. In fact, he planned to keep the entire thing's true purpose a secret for decades to come. Neither world could know just what it was they were a part of, not fully, not until they were ready. Not until magic could simply be considered one more advanced technology to Muggles, an established part of their lives. Nor till wizards no longer considered Muggles to be inferior or less intelligent, but simply the majority population of the world whose lack of magical ability mattered little. And perhaps, by then, that magical ability could be given. A wizard could dream. I'm ready now. Harry stated, if you have the resources. The goblin scoffed, a harsh, throaty sound. Orange light lifted sheets of green parchment for emphasis. I've been ready since I received your owl. Wizards, slow as snails, and expect us to be the same. He couldn't argue with that. Thank you. No, thank you, Lord Potter. I am most anxious to plant your money and watch it grow. There might have been a giddy note in the goblin's voice. It was hard to tell true cheerfulness from sarcasm with the orange beings. It's always easier to spend someone else's money, Harry said, and watched the goblin's mouth split open to reveal teeth of orange bone and purple gold. Obviously, seeing how you spend the fortune your family accumulated, but no matter. I will make you more than you spend, 1,000-fold on your signature. You have it. Harry stood and accepted a quill the goblin held out for him. Show me where to make my mark. And so saying, signed beside every empty space the goblin highlighted with a splash of orange magic. Writing was difficult for him, but he had painstakingly memorized his own name to an acceptable extent. It was time to extend his and Hermione's influence into the mundane world. They would need the contacts, the people, the resources. The influence, what of it money could buy. The building blocks were all slowly being assembled, one piece at a time. Slow and steady. Slow just like the snail Shrew dubbed him, because few people saw a snail as a threat. The night was cool, the air of summer holding a hint of fall's chill. He knew the sun had set by the lack of warmth against the bare skin of his arms. For once, he had left his gloves behind and walked bare hand in hand with Hermione down the nearly empty street next to the wide blue stretch of the Thames River, the few couples around them making the same slow meandering walk, enjoying the night and each other. In the distance, he could make out the tall, deep purple hues of the Tower Bridge, sparkling against the empty sky with pure light, and even more Muggle buildings rising around them with the colors of stone and glass and shadow. It was odd at times to walk under an empty sky devoid of colorful magical wards. He had known of them all his life, before he even knew what magic was or understood their purpose. Somehow, he had always felt safe under them, like they were a second ground that kept him safe inside, and not falling up into the blank sky one day when fickle gravity reversed its course. He heard the fountain before he noticed it, a circular creation of stone and water, the blue water beautiful against the purple stone. He had picked this place because the color of it reminded him of her, even though she wouldn't know that fact unless he told her. Blue-violet, violaceous. They came to a slow stop, the silence like a living thing between them, full of expectation. She knew as well as he did that his asking for a walk was out of character. His preferred method of relaxation was sitting in front of the fire, a book at hand. He liked his space and being in it, where every object had its orderly place and purpose. The outside world was chaos, not all of it visible to him. Outside was potential anarchy and accident. Outside was a calculated risk, just like this. A risk worth taking. He turned to face her, looked into her face to see every detail possible with flickers of his own emerald light. She was smiling, heart beating fast, light racing. Smiling at him like she knew exactly what he was after, which of course he now knew she did, and had already moved on to the celebratory portion of the night. Why else would he ask to take a walk, as alone as they could safely be, mere days before their next semester started? He let his power sink back inside himself and returned her smile, taking a deep stabilizing breath, ignoring his own racing heart. I love you. I don't want to spend my life without you. I want to wake up with you every morning and complain about the time over breakfast. She laughed at that, her hands clasping his even tighter. It was a wet laugh, the kind that meant she might cry, which was not his plan at all. He hurried on. And I'll live with your cat, and your clothes, and your cold feet, 'cause I see you living with me and the cloak and the stone, my late hours and crazy experiments. We have the same dreams, if different goals and milestones within them. We have a great life together already. He paused again, resisted the urge to look at her again, and simply breathed in her vanilla scent, tinted as it was with the acrid smell of the potion work of the day. And I'd like to ask you if you would marry me. Not just sign paperwork or have a mundane ceremony, but like witches and wizards used to do. A bonding ceremony. It's forever. He could have said more. He wanted to explain that he had researched such when studying vampiric human servants, how he saw the pictures of his own parents' wedding in the Potter Vault, among the things rescued from the destruction of Godric's Hollow. How he liked the idea of their souls attached to one another in some way, as if such a thing would allow them to find another once again when they returned to that place of chaotic color and unwinding time that he saw in the few dreams he had. He held his breath, though, and didn't flood the silence with words. He waited for her questions, her reasonable comments on how marriage was all well and good, but bonding was another matter entirely. Quite unpopular and out of style this day and age, and so very permanent, no room for change of heart, making a jail out of a relationship and throwing away the key. Yes, and his heart leapt in his chest. She breathed the word, using all her might not to shout it into his face. Hope had tentatively began to dawn on his face. Yes, he queried hesitantly. I want forever, Harry, of course I do. You're so SS silly. She didn't get to finish the sentence. He swept her up to him with strength he didn't truly possess, the static electricity of his magical use causing the hair on her arms to prickle. Not like she cared, when he kissed every thought from her brain. When she saw and felt the joy inside him springing forth like the water from the grand fountain they stood beside. Why wouldn't she want to spend forever with a man who acted like she had just given him the entire world by agreeing to be his wife? The man who watched her sleep, who asked Creature to cook her favorite foods and sat with her while she ate, even as he himself increasingly was barely finishing his own portions, who had memorized the very pattern of her being and the color of her soul, and helped her champion the causes she believed in, who guarded her and her family any way he could and loved them as much as she did. He was so silly to think she would ever say anything other than yes, absolutely, as soon as possible, please. She rather liked the idea of having him chained to her as much as she was to him, with magic as well as love. Her silly man, how she loved him. Brennan, the shadow of Nocturne Alley, son of Lord Magnussen and the Lady Elaine, returned to his coven with none of the weariness he should have felt from his week of travel. Memories filled his body with the energy of their centuries. He remembered his mother's face, her smooth hands and loving dark eyes. The touch of his father's clawed hand on his shoulders when he claimed his first bonded nearly a millennium ago. Their deaths, holding hands together before the All Hallows fire, his mother singing the sad song of a vampire older than memory. The way his father had screamed as they burned, the way time had paused and drawn out the torturous process, the overwhelming heat against his face. We wait, we wait, we wait for the one, for the eyes that see beyond. Wait, dear one, our lovely children, for the promise we give you now. He is coming to give you life. He is coming, he is near, he is almost here. His sister's slight form curled against him, hugging him as she whispered in his ear. Don't forget us, Brenny. Only he had. One day she was there, walking the cedar hallways of what was once their family manor. The next she was gone. He had found the note she left for him. We can't watch the hunger take us like it took them. His parents, so loving, so beautiful, became monsters. He wouldn't have wanted her to see that either, though the loss of her had haunted him for centuries. Never did he search for her, and then there was the day he forgot she ever existed, when any proof of her life was faded from his memory, the way his old home had faded from the world, would rotting back to earth as time moved on without him. So many bonded he had taken and lost. So many wizards and witches changed into his own image. So many deaths he had witnessed and lives he had taken, memories given and received until he felt like nothing but a broken receptacle, constantly being filled and then drained away. Until now. Until it was his turn to be changed and made again in another's image. Now the years were full and complete, so many memories that his mind brimmed with them and spilled over, a stream of consciousness that stretched back to when his own time first began. A young boy held in his mother's arms, her blood in his mouth, her singing words in his ears as she rocked him, soothing his hungry cries with hopeful promises. Wait, wait, wait. Let the time that passes give us hope. Let the blood of our souls give us comfort. Wait, wait, wait. We will not feel this pain forever. He is coming, he is near, he is almost here. How he had loved to hear her sing. He, her first child and only son, born at a time when it was dangerous to be born, dangerous to be young and fragile in the dark world. When vampires were so few and always hunted, covens sleeping together in caves deep in the earth, always waiting, always hunting for their next meal among the short-lived mortals around them. They were a powerful people now. Alone, they could kill hundreds. Together, thousands. They could walk through an army and tear the throats of men in the blink of an eye and bathe in the blood for hours after. Wizards, with their shields and spells, fared better, but only in small ways. Vampires brought death with them. It lurked inside their blood and shone from their eyes. They were made to send mortals into death and carry their memories inside their blood. Perhaps they should have ruled the world. A dominant, perfect creature. A predator among predators and nearly immortal. But they didn't and never had. They were not meant to rule a daylight world. Lord Brennan, a young vampire at his left, barely a decade old, closing the door behind him with quiet efficiency. We have missed you. We, not I, speaking for the coven entire, a collective group made such out of pure necessity, sharing memories and pain and hunger and heat, all the days of their living death. Until now, Brennan smiled, feeling the prick of fangs against his lower lip. I have missed you as well. The vampire Luke of Gregory and Gillian went motionless with surprise, black eyes unblinking. Tell them to come to me, all of them, every one of us in this place. I have been changed. What do we say to them? Luke's voice was hesitant, hands folded together in meticulous formality. He is coming, he is near, he is almost here. He is here. Chapter 32. Illumination. It was late, the room bathed in darkness, when Hermione awoke to the distinct feeling of being alone. It had taken her days to get used to the sensation of sleeping with a partner. Weeks to realize that she never again wanted to sleep alone, despite the occasional awkward shuffling of limbs and rearranging of hair, or the ever-present cloak atop her like a claustrophobic cloud. That was what had awoken her, the cold air on her face. The cloak was gone, its smooth silk nowhere near her questing fingertips. A shuffling sound made her sit up with a frown, gaze turning to the door even as she reached for her wand. One wordless charm brought light flooding into the room, her squinting eyes making out the curious sight of the cloak spilled onto the floorboards by the closed door. Hermione rose, shrugging on a dressing gown even as she approached the door, the floor as chilly as the air. Creature liked to keep the place cold, even in the heat of summer, a fact which had also taken some time to get used to. Her own parents tended to try to conserve electricity and their wallets with more practical temperature control methods. What are you doing down there? Hermione muttered, and felt instantly foolish. Now Harry had her talking to the thing. She reached down for the folds of silk and froze. Was that movement? It had. An unmistakable ripple worked itself through the silk fabric, even as it shifted in such a way that made her think of a dog, impatient to be let outside to do its business. Hermione jerked her fingers back, folding back up with a glare at the innocent-looking cloak. Well, nothing else for it. She reached out and opened the door, then watched with incredulous eyes as the silk seemed to sigh and rippled across the floor and away. She followed as quietly behind it as possible, eyes locked on its progress as it flowed around one corner and through the railings of the barrister, dropping down the stairs like silken water. "Harry," she grumbled, tightening the belt of her robe. "The things I put up with." At the bottom of the stairs, she saw the cloak slip past a rigid Crookshanks, his ginger fur ruffled with aggravation, his yellow eyes not looking at the cloak at all, but outwards into the room beyond. Which was when she heard the familiar voice, smooth and elegant mid-sentence. All agreed the benefits outweigh the loss of longevity alone. Add to it the highly reduced blood hunger and the ability to tolerate sunlight, and none are openly opposed. Of course there are doubts, but I, as master of my coven, have decided to volunteer my own to begin the process as soon as possible, as the other masters too shall have to decide to approach you. A vampire in her house, without her knowledge. Harry couldn't have woken her up to explain they were having a visitor. She folded her arms with a scowl. While she believed vampires had every right to be treated as equals, she also couldn't forget how dangerous they were, nor that they had once already made Harry vulnerable. Where was Vaughn? Surely the guard would know. I'd rather have their consent personally before I start. I don't think I can reverse the process easily, if at all. I need to make sure this is what they want. Harry sounded tired. Still, even a week after the transformation he had triggered in Brennan. His headlong rush the entire summer had zapped any reserves of energy or magic he possessed, and now he was paying for it. Still, you do not understand completely. Hermione peeked around the corner, eyes narrowed, to see the two men facing each other across the kitchen table, who picked their kitchen table for a meeting with a master vampire. She took in the layout and was immediately comforted by the presence of Kraken at Harry's elbow, the house elf courteously holding a tray of some type of steaming beverage. She knew good and well that the house elf was more than capable of handling all manners of dark creatures, perhaps even a vampire. Still, the sound of that liquid hiss in Nocturne Alley a year ago haunted her. Vampires were not beings to trifle with. What's to understand? That they should have control over whether I manipulate their bodies or not. A flicker of silvery fabric, and she saw where the cloak had gone. It was slowly slithering up Harry's legs, an overgrown animated blanket. Harry's hand absently moved down to slide across its folds, and Hermione suppressed a grimace. Had Harry summoned the cloak all along, or had this odd encounter been all the cloak's idea? And if so, did that mean there was a brain hidden away in the silk somewhere? Where did a sentient, inanimate object tuck away its intelligence? And why wasn't Harry more concerned about this riddle? That they have no true sense of self in order to give the consent you desire. I myself did not, when I put myself into your hands. I was driven by the urge to preserve my species, no more and no less, like any semi-intelligent animal has. The instinct to continue to keeping on. Ironically enough, to prevent my own death. Vampires, as they are a collective, thinking of themselves only in their relation to one another, all brothers and sisters, parents and children. We exist to drink blood and love one another, to ease our collective suffering, to stay alive. It was not until this last week that I began to understand what it means to be independent, and yet also understand loneliness. I have never been alone, just as I have never walked in the sunlight. These are gifts I would give my people, gifts that could prevent the decay of our mental state into that of nothing more than bloodthirsty monsters that are eventually eradicated by us or outsiders. Harry tilted his head back, green eyes unfocused and half-lidded. One of his 5 thinking poses that she had dubbed to herself as the Dreamer. How do the vampire hunters even kill a vampire? With your abilities, and in groups, such shouldn't be possible. Even the Ministry privately knows they couldn't truly face a vampiric army or even a determined coven. Brennan smiled, an eerie expression that showed off his gleaming elongated fangs perfectly. They do not kill us in groups. Most lone vampires they target, the ones who have broken laws regarding blood donations, are half-mad and pushed outside their covens for the self-preservation of the family. The others are those vulnerable, children, and the elderly who are weakened mentally and magically. Rarely are these left alone, but accidents do happen. Blood donations. What a way to describe what was often done to the victims of rogue vampires. There usually wasn't much of a body left to identify afterwards, in a pile of bloodless flesh and bone. I've wondered why we as humans aren't currently ruled by vampiric monarchs. With your lifespan and time-manipulative abilities, I doubt we'd stand much of a chance. Something odd. The cloak was rippling under Harry's hands, its silvery sheen reflecting the candlelight in distinct patterns. Brennan was looking at it, she could tell, his dark eyes as unreadable as his thoughts. Ah, I too have debated the profit to be gained from such a situation. Who doesn't secretly desire to rule the world and to drink my fill? The threat in his tone wasn't truly obvious. It was carried in the hiss underneath his voice, the sound of tongue against fang, the slight forward movement of his torso and tightening of claws against wood. And in response, as if cued, the cloak shifted up Harry's chest in a move she could only think of as protective, which was when she realized what she had been missing all along. The cloak was acting like a shield. But what could the cloak, as amazing as it was, do against a vampire? Brennan leaned back in his chair, smiled again with a shrug. Had he, too, just made a similar realization? But it could never happen. Even if the daylight could be overcome through the use of bonded servants, our very longevity works against us. For all our physical prowess, our mind is fallible. The very act of manipulating time speeds up the process of deterioration, which led to many of our elders going into a recuperative sleep, one sometimes lasting decades. The very war that would win us the world would destroy us in turn. What would be the point in such an endeavor when we have reached a beneficial balance as things are? Harry was still dreaming, eyes closed now, body completely relaxed. Almost you would think him asleep if it wasn't for the hand that gently ran down the cloak's fabric on his chest. And when your coven is changed. You have told me many of your physical abilities remain intact after the process, with the exception of those mental ones relating to time and mind manipulation. I will remove all of your weaknesses and only a portion of your strength. How can I trust you? Never had Hermione heard him express concerns about that very thing, though now that he mentioned it, it made perfect sense to question vampiric motives. She was tense as a wire, her heart hammering in her throat. And yet he sat there, relaxed, his staff nowhere in sight. How you flash like lightning. The vampire murmured softly, so softly she was forced to hold her breath to hear him. Never have I sat beside a wizard quite like you. You would threaten me. Threaten. Her eyes whipped between the two, her fist tight around her wand. At the corner of her eye, Crookshanks stood stiffly, back-arched. Kraken hadn't moved from Harry's elbow, tray now on the table, bulbous eyes fixed on Brennan like a tiger watching its prey. The air seemed to crackle with energy, the hair at her nape rising. Her mouth was dry. She smelled it on the air and knew what it was she was feeling. Energy, more specifically Harry's energy. Only this time it was not comforting. It fairly split the air open with tension. If only she could see what was happening between the two men. Didn't matter. She knew spells that could take down a single vampire if need be. One wrong move and there will be one less vampire to worry about. No. Harry's soft voice, eyes opening to reveal the glowing shade of emerald green she knew so well. I'm reminding you, I won't create something that will destroy what I plan to build, as I told you when we began. A moment of charged silence, then Brennan sighed. So dramatic. I will remind you I keep my promises, as will my coven. And I have no desire at all to lead my race into revolution against those whose ancestors wronged us centuries ago. Those ones are long dead already. We only hope for peace. The energy seeped away, the light in Harry's eyes dimming to a normal shade of green that seemed dull in comparison. Kraken picked up the tray with a stately sweep of his arms, his movement seeming to be the key that unlocked peace in the room. Crookshanks sat and began to groom his tail with vigorous jerks. Harry's head tilted sideways towards her, looking through the space where she stood. Hermione, I hope we didn't wake you up. Mr. Brennan stopped by for a discussion. She made herself smile and step into the room, wondering when exactly it was she had been noticed. Not that she wasn't entirely entitled to hearing every word spoken, because she most certainly was. It had simply seemed like an intrusion to step into a conversation she hadn't been invited into, which was a matter to take up with her fiancé at another time. Her fiancé. Her eyes flicked down to the beautiful emerald ring on her finger and up again before she spoke. Mr. Brennan, is it late or early for you? Late, I'm afraid. The vampire rose to greet her with a quick nod before looking down at Harry. All Hallows Eve. It is traditional to have a gathering. That would be a good time if you are willing. How many? His hand reached out for hers, and she gladly took it, sliding her wand into one pocket in a gesture of goodwill she was certain the vampire didn't miss. There are 635 who call me Lord, spread across this region, 9 of which are children, one newly born, our first in many years. Indeed, Brennan smiled at her. She repressed a shudder. His teeth looked like that of a shark's. I will start with the children. We will see how the evening goes with the rest. Harry's words holding a tone of finality. Have a good night. The vampire gave a slight bow and was gone. His exit to the door followed closely by a lurking kraken. Then they were alone, and Hermione took a deep breath to gather her thoughts. Time to have that talk. Rufus Scrimgeour frowned down at the report on his desk, his mood dark. Across from him, Ethan sat poised in her chair, the small Asian woman alighted like a bird of prey eyeing her next meal. You can't argue with the evidence. Her voice stern and chiding. They are baiting him. He placed one rough palm flat on the parchment, took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts and words. We haven't used him all summer. Not for lack of trying, she replied quickly. And that's not my point. There is a direct correlation with the increase in warded structures holding nothing but useless empty caches, long abandoned, before and after the werewolf incident. They have his scent. He was getting too old for this. And yet too young to admit it. Spell it out, hit wizard Ethanon. Black hair lay braided neatly over one shoulder, dark eyes fixed on him with unwavering intensity. When she spoke, there was nothing but conviction in her tone. They are trying to identify him. They are laying overly complicated wards that take Matthews a ridiculous amount of time to dismantle. Inside, there is nothing that would warrant such wards. If they wanted to kill him outright, they would have placed a trap. But that would risk tipping us off. I didn't understand at first, either. It's lucky coincidence that Hippogriff has been indisposed the past summer. Indisposition that had a vampire regularly visiting Grimold Place, according to the routine detail that discreetly monitored the property from an adjacent building. For the Lord's security, Scrimgeour had told the Aura team. Privately, he admitted the truth he knew they suspected. He too had doubts about a wizard holding so much power inside Great Britain. Better to have some idea what drew so much of his time and not be surprised about it later. Ethan narrowed her eyes at him. But that's neither here nor there. Lux has noticed the new talent at our disposal. They have a methodical process to eliminate such talent, and we both know it. There is a reason I lost 3 of my men. There is a reason my sister is dead. Even if they saw him in action, they could not identify him with the armor. He is disguised. Even he heard the grasping tone in his voice. He knew Lux. He knew they didn't care about casualties or innocence. He remembered Ethan holding her young niece, crying, robes dusted with fallen debris, the safe house's walls shattered around them. The dead, also shattered, in so many pieces they had buried the fragments of their bodies together in one grave. That might have worked in the beginning, but his power appears to be in flux. I am not the only one who has noticed that the glamour over his hood does not entirely mask his eyes. His face should be solid shadow in the field, but at times a green glow is unmistakable. She paused, then continued in a gentler tone. There are no secrets, not forever, and he is too special, too unique. He can't hide what he is. If he could, he would be of no use to us. You have to stop using him immediately. It's not worth what could happen if they discovered just who has been helping us hunt them. He needed a drink. Ogden's finest might do the trick. You think they could kill him? He meant to pose it as a question, but his voice fell flat on the words. The hit wizard looked down and away for the first time since she had walked into his office with a folder under one arm and a mission in every step. As publicly as possible, Minister, yes. I do. He is not immortal or all-powerful. I have seen him bleed, as have you. He remembered a day, not so very long ago, when he saw the young lord pulling a Dementor into pieces while it silently screamed. Another day when he witnessed Robard pushing the slightly older lord from a building about to come down around their heads. He had seen Lord Potter bleed, yes, but not in some time. And lately, he had not been sure that the wizard he saw sitting across from him in the Wisengamot was the same young lord he first met, unfocused eyes vibrant with conviction. The air around him did not sit quite the same, and the green of his eyes were too bright to be natural. Stopping to greet him in the courtroom had made the hairs on his neck prickle with warning. his hand twitching longingly for the familiar wand at his side. Something in the air, some look in his eyes. As if he was being watched, down to his very soul, and his days and their contents weighed and measured. In flux, indeed. We will stop the hit wizard portion of the contract. She looked surprised at his easy agreement. No doubt she had been prepared for more resistance. But when he closed the door behind her minutes later and walked to his cabinet, withdrawing the cool glass tumbler from its spot, he doubted she knew that he was not quite as concerned Lux Samba might kill the blind sorcerer. He was truly afraid they would try and fail, and the entire world would witness it. Harry watched the last of Hermione's lights swirl from the room after the trademark sound of apparition. She was on her way to the first week of classes, her schedule as rigorous as she could manage without risking complete burnout. She wanted to finish quickly. He preferred the more laid-back approach. His own bag of school books waited by the front door, neatly placed underneath the place his rain cloak hung. A sign that Creature was aware of the threatening weather the day might bring. The elderly house, Elf himself stood at the entrance, form rigidly straight. It was time for the discussion, one that the elf had been putting off for over 6 months in one way or another, usually by distracting Harry with something else of concern. But not anymore. Today is your day off, your mandatory day off. The elf didn't even twitch an ear in response, and Creature shall spend it as it pleases Creature. Harry narrowed his eyes. The elf received 1 day off a month, which was already insanely insufficient. Kraken had appeared to take up his day of forced freedom by tinkering with old black artifacts in the attic. Creature, on the other hand, hadn't differed in his duties an iota, not on any of the last 12 free days. The fact that it had taken Harry so long to not only notice, but attempt to do something about it, made him feel quite guilty. You do exactly what you always do. You cook and clean. Why not do something you might enjoy? Yellow arms folded defensively. Creature enjoys cooking and cleaning. Perhaps Master might make more mess and eat larger portions if it pleases himself to make Creature enjoy himself. Harry took a deep breath, tried to remember exactly what he and Hermione had thought up between them. She had been much more helpful when it came to thinking of things that might make a house, elf a happy hobby. Of course, that had come after she had spent a good 10 minutes blistering his ears with a diatribe about his unannounced vampiric visitor, one he had forgotten to inform her was stopping by. Once she got him to admit that he had hoped she would sleep through the whole uncomfortable encounter, he had been forced to resort to fervent pleas for forgiveness when she laid into him again with very reasonable arguments as to why he ought to make her aware when any potentially hostile dark creatures entered their home. Their home, she had stressed. Right, Harry mumbled. Focus on the task at hand. Happy house elf hobbies. Hobbies to make house elves happy. Non-work-related happiness. How do you feel about the roof? The elf relaxed slightly at the change in subject. The roof, sir. Yes, what do you think about it? Creature shifted. It's in decent repair. It's large, correct, Harry prodded. The attic is quite large, Master. So is the roof over it. Always matter of fact. He did so love the ornery elf. And flat. Creature stomped closer, looking up at him. Creature wonders what the Master wants with the roof. Harry looked at the elf, trying to decide how he would take his next statement. I don't want it. I'm giving it to you. A blink of eyes now highlighted green with his energy. The elf leaned slightly back, long, spindly arms falling to his sides. Harry waited for a question, any question. When none came, he let his energy fade with a frown, reverting the sharp green outline to its normal flickering yellow form. I'm giving you the roof to do whatever you want. It's mostly flat, nothing up there. Hermione rather thought you might want to start a rooftop garden or something, maybe even a partial greenhouse. It would take a lot of work, but still no response. It was his own turn to shift uncomfortably. The wards would prevent anything you do from being observed. There is already an access door. You can have any materials you want from the house or Diagon. It's yours. He finished the last lamely, abruptly certain he had overstepped some invisible boundary. Creatures. The elf's quiet question made Harry refocus on where he still stood, motionless. Yes, yours. Creatures. The elf straightened and stepped away, a snap of his fingers lifting the rain cloak from its rack and drifting towards him. Master will need this today. Thanks, he mumbled, sliding his hands clumsily through the openings. When he reached down for the brown leather of his bag, the house, Elf was already pushing it into his grasping fingers. Have a good day, Master Potter. the elf said with a formal bow. Then he proceeded to usher him from his own house, shutting the door on his surprised face with a gentle click. What did you do now? Not eat your breakfast? Vaughn's casual words made him glance at where his friend and bodyguard lounged against the step rail. I gave him the roof. A moment of startled silence, then the wizard laughed. I'll write that on your gravestone. Here lies the man who gave away his roof. Harry grimaced, carefully stepping down the concrete stairs, his staff held loosely in one hand and his bag in the other. Very funny. Process of elimination, lady, the kneeling witch said in her musical voice, blue eyes respectfully lowered. All but one have been present in their particular team's movements this summer. Not once have our defenses been swiftly eliminated. It stands to reason it is the missing team member who is our ward breaker. From the velvet-lined chair, a woman dressed in vibrant green robes smiled. Find out the identity of this witch or wizard, please, my dear, but leave them alive. I wish to plan something perfect, a grand gesture appropriate for their level of talent. Hippogriff is the missing member's code name, according to the whispers from the ministry. Hippogriff. Another smile, sweet and satisfied. Too bad I've always hated to bow. Rustling as the kneeling woman rose, backing toward the door. A fire burned low in the hearth. With a small flick of a wand, it roared back to vibrant life. The first month of classes went by with plodding monotony. Harry forced himself to learn what was needed, the simple facts that built one upon another until their conclusion. Each subject similar in its pathways, mathematics and physics and biology, all expanding exponentially as detail was added to the whys of how the world worked. Mundane science was varied in its studies and limitless in the knowledge to be gained. Harry had the same trouble he always had, focusing on only one idea instead of many, making his mind follow through with what he needed for his overall goal, not just what was most interesting or complex. And one reason he still attended the slow-moving textbook classes was not the coursework at all, but the people in them. His classmates, mostly ignored and tolerated, held a potential he had not at first considered. One in particular was the son of a man in Parliament, another a son of an office drone in the Prime Minister's vicinity, a niece of a man in the government's security detail. Dozens of connections, some obvious and others less so. He needed to establish himself as part of the mundane world, a wealthy orphan of intelligence and motivation. He would need people in the mundane world. Scientists and biologists, business professionals, barristers, even accountants. If they were to incorporate magical potions and cures into a form the mundane would not only accept, but embrace, there could be no hint of duplicitousness. If they were to pass government tests, nothing could be out of place. This first, crucial step, the foundation of his and Hermione's dreams, would require delicacy and time, and most of all, people. A great many people, all informed to various degrees of the whole plan, all trustworthy. A guarantee they would use magic to provide. Harry turned towards the young man next to him, Adam Gelbart, a soul of pale yellow, with a smile of greeting. No contact was too small. It was Adam, whose father worked in the Prime Minister's office, who told him one afternoon of a coworker whose wife was disabled because of a spinal injury, the complications of which were causing multiple other effects. Hermione was the one who took that information and devised which combination of potions and spells might reverse the nerve damage and potentially repair bone discs. It's a trend I've seen in comparing magical and muggle maladies. She mused, sitting back from her own desk with a sigh. Witches and wizards can easily heal broken bones and ruptured organs if caused by a purely physical event. It's when magic gets involved that such cures lose much if not all of their effectiveness. A bone broken in a fall is repaired with only minor discomfort. A leg broken by dark magic would have to be physically set and take a great deal of time to heal, if it is ever healed entirely. The nerve damage to this woman's spine in a car accident will be no trouble to repair. But a witch struck by, say, the cruciatus for more than a few minutes will experience nerve damage that might cause permanent paralysis, if not extensive brain damage. Harry, standing behind her glowing blue-violet form, rested his hands on her shoulders, pressing into the stiffness of her shoulders. She leaned into him, face tilted upwards, soft hair tickling his skin. He heard the smile in her voice. I can brew the potions to heal this woman. I'd do it even if there was no advantage to be gained. I wish I could do it for everyone with this type of injury. I plan to live to see just that become possible." Harry kissed her gently, his intended target of her lips missing to land softly on her cheek. No matter. He knew the way from cheek to lips and worked his way there, the angle awkward but satisfying nonetheless. When she pushed him away with a laugh to rise and take his hand, he was more than happy. He was content. It was after the September meeting of the Wisengamot, a monotonous affair of much talking and little action, that Harry and Vaughan approached the modest flat on the first story of a large housing complex. "I'm going in alone." His tone brooked no argument, and the bodyguard gave none, leaning against the outside of the building with nonchalant posture. Harry rung the doorbell and waited until a light green soul answered, weariness evident in the pulse of his life and the slump of his bulky shoulders. "May I help you?" guarded curiosity. Harry smiled and spoke his planned words carefully. "I'm here to offer to heal your wife, at no cost to you other than your silence. If you agree, I would ask for one future favor, though you will be under no obligation to give the favor if it is not to your liking." The man had startled, straightening with sudden energy. He looked either angry or excited, and based on his hand on the door, was about to slam it in his face. Harry quickly continued, voice low and fervent. "This is a chance to return your wife to the way she was before her accident. If you close this door, it will never come again." The man's voice was gruff, and the emotion there was indeed anger. "If there was a way to fix the damage, I would know of it. This is a cruelty to offer me hope that doesn't exist. Get off my doorstep before I call the authorities. It's an experimental treatment, not yet released to the public, and won't be for many years. No one can know I'm offering it for human consumption. She only need drink this." Harry held out two gleaming white vials, identical to his sight. "They are both the same compound. I will drink half of both to prove it is not poison, and the other portion can go to her." Silence, stretching out like fog off the ocean. Hope could be a painful thing, hard to accept so quickly. Hope could burn when it died, and scar its victims in ways they could never forget. But more powerful than the fear of hope was the force of desperate love. "Come in." A harsh order that Harry followed carefully, greatly aware of the many shadows in his vision in the mundane space. The door slammed behind him, the entrance room smelling strongly of cleaning chemicals and medicine, and the sickly sweet taint of the long-sick. "If you are lying to me, I will use every means I have to destroy you and this wonder drug." Angry sorrow. "My wife can't raise her head, can't move any of her limbs. I can see no way that that tiny little vial will do anything. I can't explain the process to you, sir." Harry spoke gently. "And you can never tell of my being here or the contents of these vials. She need only drink, and in the span of a month regain motor function. It is a slow-acting process for finite movements, but by tomorrow feeling will begin to return." For a witch, it was mere days, because their own magic would supplement the potion. For a mundane woman, based on the few instances a muggle-born or half-blood had documented its use on family members, that time was expanded to a month or more. Even that information had been hard for Hermione to find, the magical world not eager to inform people of the rights of their non-magical family to magical medicine. "You're serious?" The man abruptly found a chair, invisible to his sight, and sat heavily. "You're really serious?" Harry waved away his statement. "I recommend weaning off any other medication inside a week. I'm not sure how it might conflict with this drug. More like Hermione wasn't sure. Magical and mundane medication had not exactly been tested in concert." Aye, the man stuttered. "I can't believe." "Then don't." Harry pushed one vial toward the man, who took it with shaking fingers. "Let this prove it to you. Give her back her life." "Why us? Why her?" he asked softly, head shaking. "I can't understand this." "I will not lie to you. I chose you because, in the far future, I might need to ask you for a favor because of where you work. This is my gift in advance, to gain your goodwill." Not entirely true, and not entirely false either. If the man refused, he would be obliviated of the entire incident by Vaughan, and his wife given the cure while he was unconscious. A letter left on their table describing the secret treatment she had been given by an unknown benefactor. There was profit to that course, perhaps even more than to be gained by talking directly with the husband. But Harry didn't like the idea of forcing the potions on them. His morality at times was fluid, other times it was not. The man abruptly stood. I would never forgive myself if this would have worked, and I said no. How do I give it to her? Orally, if she can swallow. If not, intravenously would be best. She has an open port. He said dully, moving into another room where a woman lay supine, her soul full and bright, her body's pattern broken. The man did not insist on Harry taking half of either vial. He just used a syringe to remove the white liquid and then push it into lines of shadow Harry could not see. Hermione had determined that the magical contents could be taken orally, by shot, or even topically over the skin, as the ingredients were specifically brewed to soak into the flesh of its host. It was merely wizarding tradition that had most potions being taken orally. All that mattered was that they were allowed to soak into the body. Long moments passed, the man holding his wife's hand. Harry began to back out of the room quietly. "Who are you?" the man asked softly. "And how long before this works?" He ignored the first question and answered the second. "It varies, but you will see effects within the next 24 hours." Harry turned and moved toward the exit. "Wait." Green light hurrying towards him. "How do I contact you if something goes wrong?" "We'll be watching," Harry said simply, then opened the door, instantly allowing a low-grade invisibility charm to roll over him. He would count his steps to the stairs outside. The man cursed loudly, calling out his door. "What the hell? Wait! Stop!" But Harry was already gone. 2 weeks later, he watched as a green soul gently helped another ease out of her wheeled chair in the local park, bare feet sinking into the grass as a feminine laugh echoed away. Vaughn snorted, satisfied. "I told you she was being monitored by Lucy and no problems reported. She can stand and should be able to relearn how to walk soon." And no mention of us. Harry listened to the murmur of their voices. "You took a big risk." Vaughn began, shaking his head. "But no, not a peep." Some of JTP's people were monitoring their telephone use on the mundane end. Man is simply saying his wife woke up with some excess function, calling it a miracle. He didn't let the doctors do tests, which is something we should have thought of as well. A muggle blood test might have given us away. "We'll think of that next time." "Next time," the wizard groaned. "How many more times we going to do this? Until we don't need to any longer." Harry grinned. "So get used to being a good Samaritan." He only grumbled a muffled complaint in response. The green-eyed stranger would ask something horrible. David knew that, deep in his bones, the minute Lillian opened her eyes and lifted one hand in wonder to him, smiling at the miracle of the action. Miracles didn't come free. David knew that, too. He was under no illusions at all that it was his job, his position, that had put his own circumstances into the agenda of an unknown person, with an unknown drug that worked miracles. Maybe it would be information. Maybe one day he would open his post box and see a letter with no address and no name, only a request and a location. Maybe it would be theft. Maybe David sat at the cog of a wheel of intrigue he had never seen. The heist of the century, perhaps. Maybe it was the rich playing games with the poor. Maybe it was murder. On and on his thoughts went. Is he angel or is he devil? Circles of self-recrimination and doubt. And above all, a depth of gratitude he could not express aloud, even to his beloved wife. Lillian sat up, and then she crawled and then walked, like a toddler learning the use of her legs, until one day she ran to him, laughing in delight, and David knew it didn't matter what was asked of him in the end. His Lillian had her life back, and damn the consequences to himself. He would just have to live with himself while he waited to pay the price of his miracle. Lillian might have been crippled, but she had never been blind. She had eyes to see the darkness in her husband's eyes, and a sharp mind to wonder about her abrupt recovery from catastrophic nerve damage. What had David done? Because the look in his eyes told her it was a deal with the devil. She tried to coax it out of him. Tried first with words, then with her hands when their use returned to her. She tried bribery, tried smiles and sorrow alike. He was adamant that her recovery had nothing to do with him. Even the doctors had said she would never recover. Even the doctors had said that the fact she had regained use of her muscles was unprecedented and baffling, and with a dubious look, downright magical. And never once did David press for a reason. He had skirted the requests for more tests, for blood samples or scans or even simple interviews. Always a reason they couldn't help, always a reason they couldn't find out why. Lillian had been a cripple long enough to know she wanted no one else to suffer as she had. She would have her answers, so she did what any sensible wife would do when fearing her husband hid a dark secret. She got him pissing drunk. Then she worked her own magic. She just didn't like the answers she got. Not at all. Have you two set a date yet, dear? Aunt Petunia puttered around the kitchen, hands always flickering in motion, cleaning what little clutter there was in her pristine space. Harry, seated at the table she had pushed him towards, smiled. You've asked me that every single week. I promise you'll be the first to know when we do. She was all rapid movement and color, streaming from one place to the next, chattering on as if he hadn't spoken. I think a Christmas wedding would be just divine. Jane says her daughter does so adore Christmas. I bet you can even make it snow in the venue, which would have to be my family church, of course. Harry fondly listened as she verbally built the scenario, from the color of the bouquet to the fluffiness of the dress. A Christmas wedding was the first idea she had mentioned, and the one most often described. She also had a plan for New Year's, which involved an awful lot of blue snowflakes and black top hats, and one for the week before Christmas, but still Christmas-themed. Between Petunia and Jane, he and Hermione could have just showed up on the date, said the words, and been done with it. He hadn't yet had the heart to mention what he really wanted. Hermione called him a coward when it came to his aunt. He didn't think she quite understood how intimidating the woman's will could be. Aunt Petunia. Harry began cautiously, interrupting the spew of flower arrangements. I did have an idea, she stilled, for all the world like a predator smelling prey. He tried not to gulp. It couldn't be in a church, though. Not that the Dursleys went to church frequently, only when Petunia was sniffing out some particularly good community gossip. It's a more traditional wizarding ceremony. Oh, all casual, non-committal inquiry. Harry warmed up to the topic. The ceremony would be done on the winter solstice, this December, preceded by the 11 days of festivities. There are certain, spells and such that are done each day that build upon one another, binding spells, with the guests as witnesses less each day, until the ceremony itself, where the final rites are vowed. Not many witches and wizards do it anymore, it's mostly permanent. Mostly. Still no inflection. Harry shifted. Well, if one partner was to die, the binding would be broken. And would normal people be allowed into this wizarding ceremony? He caught it then, that small amount of hurt in her voice. He was quick to reply. Of course, the only magic being done is by the two getting bound. Well, and whoever leads the ceremony. I actually have a book. Well, and I would need to find a witch or wizard willing to lead us in the rituals. He had no idea who was going to lead it. He didn't think Hermione had a clue either. It was not something most wizards would be capable of. The details were meticulous, and with so few being performed now, I see. And Hermione wants this too. Yes. Well then. He heard her inhale deeply. I know what this means. You do. We've got 12 events to plan. Merlin, help him. Severus Snape folded black-robed arms and looked down his overly large nose at her. I must not have heard that correctly. Hermione lifted her chin, refusing to be cowed. If she had learned anything, and she had learned a lot, it was that Master Snape tolerated no weakness in his pupil. It was be forceful or be gone. Perhaps you should see a healer for your hearing problem, Master Snape. It could be serious. Eyes so dark they looked black narrowed on her. Cheeky. You are lucky I find your mind possesses above-average intelligence. She smiled, and as always, the potion's master looked uncomfortable. Positive displays of emotions, like smiles and laughter, seemed to be his weakness. She exploited it often. One learned ways to fight an enemy of equal or superior wit with enough time. Thank you, Master Snape. You are too kind. He outright scowled at that. She had practically insulted him. Miss Granger, did you really just ask me how to encapsulate an acidic potion into a thin, liquid-soluble layer that can be consumed by Muggle persons without detection? He had dodged responding to the compliment. He was a sly one. Hermione brightened further. Why, yes, I did. I have an idea about creating a soluble mold of a base substance that could neutralize the acidity of Skeelgrow, but I'm not sure if it would also slow down the effects of the bone-growing potion as well as increase the pain responders. And seeing as how pain-relieving potions nullify Skeelgrow's effect, increasing the time and rate of suffering would be unfortunate. I'm hoping you might have a solution. Miss Granger, he said her name like it was a curse. You are not ready for alchemic or potionic creation. You might have memorized compounds and their effects, but creation takes months if not years of volatile experimentation. not to mention the legal ramifications of what you have just suggested. Giving muggles magical potions against their will would send you straight to Azkaban prison, regardless of the Good Samaritan motivation. She didn't waver, but they wouldn't be unaware. They would know exactly what they were taking, medicine to help broken bones mend, if not grow calcite material entirely anew, which would also send you to Azkaban, seeing as informing non-relative muggles of magic is also illegal. He said the last through gritted teeth. Hermione spread her arms. Why mention magic? It's just science, Master Snape. It's all chemical compounds, just merely ones muggles have not been allowed to discover. I will not have to lie, nor hide the truth. He looked thoroughly disgruntled. An entire minute passed in astute silence. What are you planning? His voice was a hiss. Because I've been to Azkaban prison, I have no plans to recreate the experience. I help you, and you try that argument before the Wisengamot, and we will both find ourselves there with matching cells. No common logic will get you past the statute. I'm just hypothesizing. She hedged with a small smile on the possibility of distributing magical potions to the mundane masses. I see no reason for magical or mundane authorities to be aware of the duality of the properties such new medicine has. Helping people is a universal concept, after all. Wouldn't you like to give mundane people a better quality of life? She was expecting another sharp rejoinder, was prepared for it. She did not expect the shadow that passed over his face, the bitterness in his voice. It would never be allowed. Magic isn't for muggles. Her grin faded at the sorrow there, an emotion she knew she wasn't meant to see. She had struck a nerve unknowingly. She could either back away from the topic or press, and either option was a gamble. Fortuna audaces evat. Fortune favors the bold. Who says that? Who says magical people not only do not bear the responsibility to help their fellow humans, but should outright deny them life-saving medication? Some stodgy old witches and wizards centuries ago, afraid to step outside their warded castles. We're not those people anymore. We are not weak to be overrun by muggle technology, or heartless to turn a blind eye to the good we can do in the world. We can be equals. We can be unafraid. Dark eyes, measuring her stance. An intelligence in them she had seen in few other people. The ability to measure one's acts in life like moves on a chessboard and predict what fate might lie in every path. Master Snape was wasted in Spinner's End, alone with his potions. He could be a master at maneuvering people to his whim, or maybe he already was, and she simply hadn't witnessed it. I hope you know what you are doing, you and whoever else is in this with you. Potter, I presume. Another shadow across his features, normally so stoic and reserved. This is the sort of thing that leads to spellfire in the streets in Civil War and magical children burned at the stake by their muggle families. If it was rushed, probably. She agreed. But not if they accept it before they even know what it is. Not if it's introduced over years in a form they can and will accept. Science, Master Snape. As understood as any principle they already learn in school, and when it is discovered, it will be celebrated as the discovery of the century, of the millennium. It will be embraced for all it has to offer, not scorned. He sighed. You are young and full of dreams. You haven't seen greed and its poison. People are selfish. People don't care about others unless it benefits themselves. I choose not to believe that of everyone. People can choose to be better than that, Hermione declared, and history will prove who is right. She nearly lost her bold stance when she saw a hint of a smile on his face. It was such an unfamiliar expression. He appeared to be an entirely different person. Younger, perhaps, and less the dark denizen who belonged in a dungeon crouched over boiling potions. You remind me of someone long ago who said almost exactly that same thing. The smile disappeared as quickly as it had come, replaced by a scowl. You will not do any of this experimentation unsupervised. If you insist on pursuing such a foolhardy task, you will do it here, in my lower warded laboratory, and only after another year of study. I was not exaggerating the difficulty of experimentation with and creation of new substances. Her heart leapt. She heard it pounding away in her ears. He was going to help. He was going to help. He might not have stated it outright, but he rarely did that with anything anyway. She had known him long enough now to read between the lines. She wanted to thank him. She wanted to hug him, but he might just curse her for either expression at this point, especially the latter. She settled for a firm nod. Yes, Master Snape. He whirled, robes billowing, to lead the way into his study, where she knew a mound of books and papers would be waiting for another afternoon of memorizing and categorizing and learning. Hermione smiled at his stiff back. She doubted there was another witch or wizard in the world more qualified to help them with the task ahead, and she might have gained him for an ally. Check and mate. Such a small thing, really. A word idly spoken that could unravel an entire wealth of secrets. Hato Karazu had been discovered in such a way. She had helped an inebriated partner leave a pub in Nocturne, where the partner was heard calling a non-glamoured Karazu by another name. Ethanon, my love, where does they need this tired old horse today? Eh, by Merlin, it's my birthday. How the crowd had chuckled and laughed. How she had laughed in front of her always burning fire when she had been told the true name of the woman who led the infamous winged horse. Simple, really, to discover the other members from there, to see social contacts and contexts. Unfortunate, really, that they had missed the vital detail of the twin sister. It had been Miko Karazu who had died in the explosive fire, and Miko's only child given the Nutricatus blessing. She had tempered her anger with the knowledge that Hato would watch her beloved niece killed by inches as a year passed, eaten away from the inside. Hato would be killed after that bitter end of her last living relative. Along with the other surviving original member of Winged Horse, and any unfortunate new recruits the department might scrounge up to replace the ones her lights had scattered into a million paces. There was nowhere for them to hide. No warded space she could not break, no shadow she could not illuminate. It was only a matter of time. Only a matter of time. Except, the child was not dead nor dying. The child had made a miraculous recovery from a curse with a 95% fatality rate. A recovery when she was at death's door, to the crossroads of losing magic or losing life, and likely to lose both either way. A miracle of magic, as her wards being turned into water was a miracle of magic. Transfiguration on a scale unheard of in the modern age. She had done her reading, learned her legends. She knew how very rare such an ability was, so rare its existence was discounted as coincidence or myth. She knew what the ancient scholars had said of such. Merlin, who could turn stone to water and water to stone, who could make the wind itself into a fiery serpent to consume his enemies. Merlin, who could breathe life into the dying and speak to the ghosts of men and give them dying peace. Merlin, who could be caged by no ward, who walked through magic as one walks through air, and spoke of magic as if it was a beautiful, chaotic beast that paced along at his side. Merlin, who had lived too long for a wizard, was rumored to perhaps still live. The prince of enchanters, whose grave was never found. A spell inventor, a magic seer, whose form could be liquid like a metamorph magus, who spoke at times in prophecy. On and on the scrolls read, each page more fantastical than the last. Merlin was not possible. He was a fantasy of a real man, created to awe children. So she too had thought, until she had begun to wonder. Ward structures of impeccable precision turned into water, or mist, or ice, shattered into particles no matter what form they took. Her men, killed in strange ways, bodies alive but minds not, or raving mad about a green-eyed demon who made their skin into iron weights that crashed them to the floor, watching helplessly as their fellows contorted in screaming agony, hands grasping at head or heart. The ministry could not squash every rumor. The underground talks all the more about a secret the more secret it is. A man, a wizard, they said. No ward can stop him, no magic can touch him. He is a heliopath, an experiment of the unspeakables, sent to rid Nocturne of the dark with fiery intensity. Green eyes, so vivid. Always they mentioned those eyes. Unnatural eyes. Eyes that made the heart race and fail and die. Eyes that would make you do anything to get them to glance your way. How gladly you would die for them. Oh, she should have known so much sooner. Should have come to the conclusion on her own, before her lights came to her, and whispered it into the air in her study, as if saying the name might summon the terror itself. How the beautiful green-robed woman had shaken upon her floor with fear at what she had learned. How her voice had tremored. The rumor has persisted for a long time, but no one really believed it. Why waste his time there, doing the ministry's dirty work? He could do anything he wanted. Given anything he doesn't already have, he's Britain's hero. He's not really real to them. He's their own fantasy, a person above trivial concerns like them and their lives. He's a walking myth. How familiar that sounded now. Merlin, too, had always been her favorite fantasy. But the coincidences were too many. The locations and sightings, the whispers in the department, the visits to the minister, and Robard's frequent presence. The hospital was when I really started looking, but to believe it. How those werewolves were cured. Then Ethonen's niece, the similarities, the coincidences, they stacked higher and higher. Then he was gone all summer, and no hint of his presence except a couple visits to Nocturne, just as Hippogriff was gone from our own schemes. Then I saw him. His eyes, the woman's voice had a yearning in it under the fear. The type of yearning she liked to have on herself, not another. Outside the fall Weisengamot session. I hoped to observe, to be proven wrong. But the energy was unmistakable, I'm certain. The use of staves by both personas, the way of movement, those eyes. How does one kill Merlin? In a way even Merlin would not see coming. Abruptly, with no announcement, in a place he thinks safe to him. No warning, no time for thought, for action. She would plan this. She would stew on it for days and months, dream about it in her sleep. She would make him pay for his deeds. She would take him from the world. She would be a myth herself, the one who killed the unkillable. They would fear her. They would fear the Lady Light of Luxembourg. Chapter 33. Red Teeth in a White Maw. Hermione cautiously peeked her head through the square opening, squinting into the sunlight as it streamed through the leaves overhead. Leaves. Her eyes widened, mouth agape. Growing from what used to be a solid concrete floor she had only glimpsed once, during an exploratory tour of the building she was making her home, there was now a tree. A willow tree. It stood only 4 feet tall, elegant branches swaying in the slight breeze, newly turned soil mounded around its base. Soil that spread in every direction, covering the previous concrete in sloping waves. "You did this in a month," she breathed, turning in a slow circle. The rectangular space now boasted a hill on one side, where the willow crowned its top. To either side, encircling the roof, a wooden fence had been erected, small clumps of greenery at the base of every post. Creature been planning a long time. A gruff voice above her, bulbous eyes fixed on the willow as the house elf reached down to give her a hand up off the attic ladder. Creature's garden. She saw wooden planks stacked to one side, more potted plants placed in several orderly rows to the side. "It's amazing." The elf shifted before lifting his pointed chin. "Creature will has roses grow along the fence for privacy. The willow will grow tall, give shade. That will be a place to sit." He pointed toward the stacked wood before waving towards the potted plants. "Creature will place those beside the pond." "Pond," Hermione echoed blankly, scouring the area again with a frown. "At the base of the hill, if Miss Hermione can's help." She saw it now, a slight indentation in the soil. "Oh, I see." She walked closer, eyebrows drawn in concentration. It was doable with the right charms. Making them last, however. "I'll need stone to carve a warded structure on. It'll last nearly forever if done properly, won't ever leak. Creature will get them," the house elf declared firmly, "for Creature's garden." Hermione turned to face him, smiled. "It's going to be beautiful. I'm so glad you're doing something with all this. Harry rather thought you were offended when he gave it to you." Creature lifted his pointed chin firmly, spindly hands crossed across his chest. "Creature is most pleased." Hermione beamed, at him then around her then at the bright chilly sky for good measure. What a wonderful day. Good, that's wonderful. And with a confident flick of her wand, she strode forward onto the uneven stone path that had just begun to take shape between the mounds of dirt. "Now you'll need something to keep out this chilly air. Let's get started." Harry sat quietly, eyes focused on his right hand, as Vaughan read the letter from the minister requesting a visit. No, demanding one. It was there between the sentence asking after his well-being and the one commenting on the latest Weisengamot session, a subtle nuance that slipped through even when read in Vaughan's easy-going voice. He clenched his fist, then relaxed again, wondering what it was that had happened. The minister had very rarely been the one requesting a visit. Perhaps the man was aggravated with Harry denying the winged horse his services over the summer, or more accurately, Hermione doing it for him. Harry stood, tilting his chin up as the cloak rippled to its place about his shoulders, clasping neatly around his neck. "You're going now, today?" Vaughan began to stand as well, letting the letter fall to the end table. "No time like the present." Harry smiled, walking towards the fireplace. "Coming. It's just my job," Vaughan muttered under his breath. The guard remained silent as Harry called out the words for the atrium. The fire burned bright white with the flue powder, and he stepped through and let the magic take him, color and fire and heat, until it spat him out into the wide open area of the ministry's main level, with its rainbow of souls passing by in every direction. Bangladesh, Green stepped out behind him, and Vaughan shook the ash from his robes with a muttered curse. Harry might have grinned if he hadn't had the letter on his mind. When they exited the lift, the secretary beckoned him right through, and Harry found the door to the minister's office open, the wizard himself sitting behind his large desk with stacks of parchment to either side, a quill held loosely in one fist. "Mr. Vaughan, if you will wait outside," his gravely voice demanded as Harry stepped through. Harry closed the door behind him, ignoring the angry flicker of his guard's light. "So it's that kind of meeting?" he asked casually as he sat, watching the golden wards threaded through the air shift and sparkle. "Yes." Scrimgeour stood, and in a manner most unusual for the older wizard, began to pace. Harry leaned back in his chair, eyes closed in thought. What's happened? Is this about Nan Mordia? The werewolf enclave had been growing by leaps and bounds, and its greenhouses were due to produce their first crop of seasonal herbs. So far nothing other than minor incidents had happened inside the wards, all easily handled by Weasley in his newly titled position as sheriff. He would think he would have heard if something Weasley couldn't handle had happened. No, it's not about the werewolves, or your new vampire friends either, for that matter. That was his second suspicion, especially after he noticed the new wizarding presences lurking around Grimold Place. Scrimgeour clunked to a stop in front of his desk, shoulders straightening. "It's about Lux Samba." Harry stiffened. Just the name of the group brought a sour taste to his mouth. He waited for more, and wasn't disappointed when the wizard continued. "It has been brought to my attention that they are actively seeking your identity, most likely because they have isolated you as the key factor in their decline on British soil. After much thought and discussion with Ethanan and Robard, I have come to the conclusion that you should no longer work with the hit wizard Team Winged Horse." Harry began to speak, anger rising in his throat, but the minister jerked one Chartreuse hand through the air, his light pulsing wildly. It was that pulse that silenced him more than the gesture itself. The minister wasn't just concerned, he was afraid. "This is not just to protect you and your family. It is to protect all of the members of Winged Horse and my ministry. You are not a normal wizard, and you are too valuable to Great Britain and, dare I say, the world. You will do great things, Lord Potter. I might not like where your focus currently is, but the moves made for the house elves and the werewolves both prove your worth. We need you alive and whole, not taken out by some mad terrorist group bent on revenge. Your help has been immeasurable and has allowed us to gain ground against them at a much faster pace than we would otherwise. Now, let us finish Lux. I am confident I will see the last of them before I leave office." Harry took a deep breath, counted the seconds as his mind rolled with thought, anger and confusion, and perhaps even a small measure of hurt. Finally he spoke, his voice soft. Ethanan and Robard agreed. Scrimgeour folded his arms and leaned back against his desk, relaxing slightly once he saw Harry wasn't about to lash out. "Yes, to put it bluntly, your presence is now more of a liability than an asset. They would have been here themselves had you scheduled your visit." Slight chiding in his tone. Harry forced himself to relax, to move past his initial reaction. And truly, what could he expect? He hadn't worked with Winged Horse all summer, and never truly intended to stay with the hit wizards for long. It was a mutually beneficial partnership from the start, and now that benefit had expired, at least on one side. What will this mean for my relationship with the ministry? If Scrimgeour could be blunt, so could he. The minister chuckled, colors swaying as he shook his head. "Nothing has to change. I shall keep you on the records as a civilian consultant if the need arises for your unique abilities in a non-combative situation. I hope you are still willing to help the ministry in such cases." "Of course," Harry responded easily. "Help goes both ways, right?" "Ha!" Scrimgeour stood and paced back around his desk to fall into his chair. "Cheeky bastard. As long as that help isn't illegal, Lord Potter, we are all bound by laws." "Certainly." Harry smiled. "Some more than most." The older wizard grunted and shook his head. "Stay out of trouble, Potter, and you won't have to find out." "I plan to," Harry said honestly. Too bad trouble tended to find him anyway. It was when he was stepping up to the flue to leave that he saw her deep resolution blue light striding towards him from across the atrium. She brushed Vaughn aside and flicked out her wand, encasing them in a privacy bubble that shut out the sound of Vaughn's grumbling in an instant. Ethelyn spoke before he could, her words spilling out in a rush. "I'm sorry, Harry. I owe you a debt I can never repay after what you did for my niece, and that debt is why I insisted you leave my quartet. I can't see what happened to my previous men happen to you and your family, not after all the good you have done. You deserve better." Harry frowned. "You don't owe me a debt." She laughed, and the sound was choppy with bitterness. "You don't get to decide that. I decide. You did what no one else could, and gave me back the only family I have left. The rest of that family was taken from me by the very people I am trying to free you of. Consider that, please." A part of him wanted to be angry. He had enjoyed working with the team, enjoyed testing himself. But he was also honest enough to know that another part of him had hated the work, had hated how angry it had made him to see the damage done by Lux, and the reaction that led him to personally punish the members that blocked his path. "I'm not angry with you." He reached out a hand to gently brush her shoulder, distracted slightly by the swirl of black stone on his ungloved hand. When had he forgotten his gloves? He saw her relief when her light slowed its frantic beat, heard it in her voice when she spoke. "Can we be friends, Harry Potter?" He smiled for the first time since he heard the minister's letter. "I would like that." All Hallows' Eve began with bitterly cold night air and a wind that seemed to blow right through his layers of clothing. In front of him, the building crouched in nocturne like a beast buried to its neck in purple sand, the gleaming warding structure its ruffled fur, the door its gaping maw. Charms like teeth, flickering red to his vision, a threat and a promise. It was everything he expected when he was led to the center of vampiric power in Britain. It was age and power and completely untouchable, and Hermione had wanted to see it. She refused to hear his pleas, then turned silent when he outright refused to let her accompany him. "I can't risk it, not this time. Everything I'm doing, it's so volatile. Having you there would. Don't you remember the memory I showed you? How time wasn't itself. You helped me fix the damage to my laboratory wards. You won't be warded, Viola. I won't be able to protect you and help them at the same time. You're saying I would hold you back." Her voice was dangerously soft. "No, I'm not," Harry disagreed vehemently. "I'm saying I would never forgive myself if you came and got hurt, because it would be my magic that hurt you. Don't you trust me?" Hurt, now more than anger. Harry had risked moving closer, reaching a finger to softly touch her blue-violet face, feel the emotions there he could not see. Tolerated his touch, and he felt her tremble. "Of course I trust you. I need you. You're my light." Her lips curved, her head tilted to lay a gentle kiss on his fingers as they cupped her chin. "Don't try to charm your way into winning the argument. It was worth a shot," he had replied, "seeing as reason isn't doing much good." The argument had proceeded from there, a circle of "I need to protect you" versus "I can protect myself," each of them certain in their own abilities and uncertain of the others. And in the end, it hadn't mattered in the least. Brennan had curved one clawed hand around Harry's elbow, vibrant blue face tilted toward where Hermione waited on their doorstep. "I'll have him back by dawn, lady." She had opened her mouth, to question or to shout. Any words had been lost in the crack of apparition, the sensation of being thread squeezed through the eye of a needle and spun back into being again, a tapestry entire. The vampire had quickly stepped away on arrival, as Harry stood there, both hands on his staff now, breathing deeply to get his bearings. "I'm sorry, but only you are allowed inside, not your companions." Harry hadn't responded right away. His vision was fastened on the beast of a building, its magnificent coat of wards, its snarling door. He abruptly had a thought, a question that boiled up from the depths of his long summer studies, thought of and forgotten as irrelevant. Did vampires really use werewolves as guards at one time? A moment of silence, as Brennan relaxed his rigid posture and stepped closer, body turning to observe the place he thought of as home. Yes, a simple answer that only raised more questions, ones he did not exactly have the time for at the moment. "Hermione is not going to just sit at home and wait for you to bring me back." A breath of air, a laugh expelled that no longer held the terrifying hiss of imminent bloodshed. "Is this a roundabout way of telling me she might show up with werewolves?" Harry smiled, eyes closed as he simply looked at the beast. "Don't underestimate her ingenuity. I suggest we not dally." An incline of blue vampiric pattern, and the mouth in front of them opened its teeth, parting to reveal the empty stomach beyond. If Hogwarts was a sleeping behemoth, an ancient dragon of wisdom and power, then the Coven building was a Nundu, all hard muscle and sharp teeth and wicked promise. The air itself smelled of hot flesh and warm blood, iron and copper and fear. Hic SVNT leones, here be lions. The Latin drifted through his mind, a reference to his brief foray into bespelled maps when he was trying to decipher the ingenuity behind his father's rather astonishing creation. It denoted a place one should not wander unprepared, if at all. No one wanted to steer their vessel into the dragon's mouth, unless, of course, one was hunting dragons. Harry stepped inside, feeling the magic of the place like a husky purr in his bones, a deep beating heart, a nexus ahead of him from which all the power flowed. He had theorized such a heart existed hidden beneath Hogwarts. The one in the Coven was not hidden in the least. It reclined in front of him as they exited a long corridor into an open atrium, pillars of stone and magic to either side, a wardstone flat and rectangular and beaming with so much white magic he had to turn his vision away. A living sun, a beating heart, and inside both a semi-sentient animal intelligence birthed from the magic it held. He swore he heard it purring against his power in soft, emotive inquiry. "We welcome you, eyes that see us." All around the low altar of power, black life teemed, living shadows that soaked in the white magic and reflected nothing back, visible mostly as gaps in the overwhelming light, empty spaces of nothing. Vampires. Hundreds of them, and yet the only breathing he heard was his own, and Brennan beside him. "No bonded?" Harry asked in a whisper, something about the stillness and the sight stealing the depth of his voice. "Not this night," Brennan answered. "We've prepared the Hallows fire, and all are assembled." He could barely see the green wooden patterns upon the altar or the hungry red light that consumed it. The magic contained within the altar was too powerful, the nexus of the wards drawing his vision and blinding him to much else. It was hard to look away, hard to focus on his true purpose and not delve into the mystery of the semi-sentient structure. A small shadow approached, black hand grasped in a larger black hand. Behind him, standing tall beside the white altar, Brennan spoke. "On this night, of All Hallows, we gather together to remember the past and sing our hope for the future. But not this time. Tonight, we do not need to sing. We begin to remember ourselves. Not a single flicker of movement from the crowd, not a single breath stirring the air around him other than what Brennan expelled, blue light beating hard and fast with eagerness as he spoke. I have been given the gift of myself, the memories of my life, and the sum of who I am." Now the figures stirred, a sway of emotion he could not discern, and close by, the smaller shadow leaned towards him with a child's eagerness. Behind it he saw half a dozen more, all smaller than the last, to the infant cradled in an adult's arms. Black on black, a deeper shadow protecting a shallow one. Are we of like mind? The question seemed rote, the beginning of a ritual he did not know. There was so much he still did not know. A hiss around him, soft and sibilant. It sent a shiver down his spine and made his curling magic tighten around him. Are we one? Another hiss low, almost a growl. The magic of the altar echoed that sound, a lion purring comfort to its cubs. "Then I speak for us, Brennan, the oldest who remains. I bring to us Harry James, of the wizarding houses Black and Potter, the one who can see the door and open it." Harry tried not to shift uncomfortably and wondered if he succeeded. He could feel the eyes on him, hear air being sucked into lungs and expanded again in that low, ominous sound that only a vampire could make. And for the life of him, he could not tell if it was angry or pleased, surprised or eager or just hungry. They could eat me alive, he thought abruptly, and I couldn't stop all of them. How odd to feel so weak in the presence of beings who could be friend or foe, depending on how the night progressed. "As agreed, Lydia." Brennan's voice was soft, his light suddenly much closer to Harry, one blue hand extended to the closest child. She stepped forward on silent feet, a wispy thin figure threaded through with the barest hint of another soul's color. He hadn't been around many children since he was one himself, and even then it had been nearly impossible to interact with them in ways they would accept. He had been too different, and they too normal. Harry kneeled down to what he hoped was her eye level, his staff leaning against one shoulder as he reached out his hands to her. They were hot when she slipped her own hands into his, like holding fire trapped inside living flesh. He tried to smile and didn't know if she returned the gesture. "Lydia, this will not be pleasant," he said softly, felt the tension in the room like a loaded gun aimed in his direction. "But it will be over quickly." "Okay." Her voice was frail, tremored on the air. He did not count to 3. He gave no more warning. He tightened his hand on hers and did what needed to be done to make a broken thing whole again. It was not like the experiments with Brennan. He knew what was wrong now and what type of wrong it was. He knew where the missing pieces lay and where they needed to go. Her heart was a hidden treasure, and his magic was the map. He merely had to show her the way to herself, and her own magic would do the rest. It did not take much from him to guide, instead of force the change. But she cried out in a sound he found all too familiar, reminiscent of the cries of the children in the basement of Lux Samba, terrified and pained. Almost he wanted to stop, but he couldn't even if he tried. Her heart beat, and the second of time it had taken to repair what had never been whole stretched out on that scream, the long whistle of an unstoppable train. Color bloomed, vibrant and wild, red like the fire she seemed to be in his hands. And time was itself again, as she slumped into arms of black, tears of red fire leaking down cheeks he could see were thin and gaunt, under a head bald of any hair. Then another child was in front of him, different hands inside his own, and as he repeated the process, he felt something gathering inside his own chest. At first, he thought it elation. His plan was working. No, it was excelling. He would be able to do more than just the children. He might be able to do more than a dozen of the adults. But the feeling only grew, as 2 children turned to 3, then to 4, and it was in his throat now as well, a weight on his shoulders and a burning sun in his right hand. It was not painful and it was not pleasant. It just was. And what it was growing larger and larger, a living Ouroboros gaining momentum with every bite of its own tail. And he couldn't call it elation anymore. He wanted to call it fear because he felt afraid, and yet he was also eager because he knew he was on the precipice of something great. It knocked within him like a fist upon the door of his soul. "Let me in," the 2 Hallows seemed to whisper in his ear. "Let me out." He laid his bare right hand on the forehead of an infant, and when had he lost his gloves? The stone burned hot in his flesh, against his muscle and bone. The infant gurgled in its parent's hold. What is her name? And how had he known she was female? Elizabeth, for a sister who was lost. The mother's voice was lost as well, and perhaps she did not remember why she had been so fond of this Elizabeth to have passed her name on to her precious daughter. How does the stone know one name from another? How does the magic inside it know which soul to summon? There must be 1,000, 100,000, 1,000,000 Elizabeths among the living and the dead. Harry looked down at the small shadow swaddled in brown woolen blankets and spoke her name. Elizabeth. And that growing thing inside him, the thing that seemed to bind him to his 2 Hallows, howled in triumph and despair. Yellow bloomed like a flower, time stilled and started again, and without his magic as a map he had made her whole, and he did not truly understand how. He only knew his purpose with a clarity he had never experienced before, a single-minded focus. He was a fixer of broken things. Held in his self the power to make things as they should be. "Give me your names," he asked and commanded, and could not tell which it was, both or neither, the paradox of the Hallows a thing in his mind now, in his voice, in his hands. In the power that swirled midnight green around him with its sky of silver stars, the mother began to cry. "Sarai," she gasped, cradling her child. "Sarai," he said, and she went from shadow to shining umber, and her voice rose in painful exaltation. "I remember." The crowd flexed around him, pushing closer, a wall of heat and hope. John, Gillian, Amber, Luke, Tara, Heather, Morris, William, Frederick, Anthony, Carl, Peter, Helena, Derek, Osredi, Harold. They spoke and he spoke, and color rose into being like a rising tide of water, unstoppable, the force of gravity unleashed. They laughed and they cried and they mourned and they found new purpose. Joy, sorrow, pain, pleasure, all mixed together into one gut feeling he could not express for them. Brennan was at his back, sapphire blue hands upon his shoulders, holding him upright under the force of so many bodies pressing closer, desperate for the freedom they now believed was so close at hand. He couldn't speak fast enough. Time couldn't move quickly enough. It stopped and started and moved in ways he did not expect. The stone in his hand was gone, and he knew he should care deeply that it had moved from its chosen place. But he felt as if he stood upon it, like the stone was his feet upon the ground and his hands upon another's hands. He looked out of its eyes and saw the vampires as one would see a room of invalids, all waiting desperately for the word of a healer to make them new again. The last shadow became yellow, shot through with green, and the feeling did not ebb. There were more. He knew it with a certainty that did not come from inside himself, but from outside him, as one would know it was about to rain, and yet could not say exactly why. There were many, many more, and he could fix them. No, Brennan replied. Had he spoken his wish aloud? They have not yet said they wish to be changed. The vampire replied to a question he had not asked. Could a broken thing even give consent? Now he understood Brennan's reasoning. Now he understood how a man who had never seen the sun might not know how much he needed it. He began to take a step, and colors swirled around him too fast for him to comprehend their individual movements, a whirlpool of souls. It is still their choice, Brennan whispered in his ear, as colors around them whirled again and again in jubilant movement. Another step, so slow as the world moved by so quickly. Pressure inside him, his purpose unfulfilled. Power like a storm, a wave of unstoppable proportion. He needed to go, he needed to stay, he needed. Fight it, Brennan urged. Reason with yourself. Was he fighting something? Was that what this feeling was? Harry looked down at his hands, still raised in front of him, a conductor of no band. His staff was gone, lost somewhere among the wild colors. His hands were empty, and they were not his hands. Green flesh, so familiar, and yet it was also black, a dark shadow black of no substance, only the scattering of stars across the palms to tell him they were still there. The frozen moments stretched on, outward in every direction, flood waters of time moving in the only direction left open to them, down and down and down. Souls began to drain from the room as he took one last step, a hue here and a hue there, out and away, and leaving him alone, flickering out so suddenly he could not say which ones left first or last. He breathed in air and breathed it out again, and found where he ended and the hallows began, a tenuous line that was not neat and tidy and orderly, but jagged like the teeth in a shark's maw. It has taken bites from me, and I have taken a bite of it. Harry thought nonsensically, and wondered if he had wandered over the edge of sanity into the murky beyond. There you are, Brennan breathed, hot breath against his neck. So powerful I fear to taste you. May I? The prick of sharp teeth against his skin, not yet a painful puncture. For a moment it seemed a good idea. What would a vampire bite feel like? Did it hurt? Would he see his green-black white sink into blue and make it into something new, something beautiful and terrible? And that thought finally brought him back the rest of the way from the power that had clouded his mind. He blinked and blinked again, dry eyes burning. He sucked in air into lungs and coughed it out again, bending over and away with the violence of it. There. Brennan sounded pleased, warm hands helping him to sit in a suddenly empty room, void of all color and shadow. Only the white steps of the altar and the dead embers of the flame it once held. There you are. He only shook his head and croaked out a question. How long was I out? 7 hours. I feared I could not hold you much longer. He tried to think, tried to focus. Explain. Brennan tightened his grip on him, then released, standing with a long, relieved sigh. I feared you would apparate from here to the other vampiric covens and change them, or potentially speak their names from here and do the deed. Such an incident would be catastrophic. The retaliation brutal. Most may want this, but it still must be in their own time. You put me in stasis. I thought your powers over time were. Another hacking cough. Brennan chuckled and bent, retrieved a familiar staff from the floor to place it at his side. Diminished, yes, but not gone. I merely require a donation of blood to build the strength of the ability. Still, once I might hold a person for years in my own time. Now mere days would be difficult, and you, hours was all I could manage. Even so, I held you because you were not truly fighting me. You seemed to be more busy with your own magic. Was that last bit a question? Harry shook his head, trying to clear his mind. He wasn't tired, not in the least. If anything, he felt invigorated, and more so by the minute, which made absolutely no sense. Such power expenditure should have left him exhausted and ravenous both. And he wasn't hungry either, for that matter. Hermione would be concerned. Would be concerned about a lot of things that had happened tonight. Were you really going to bite me, or was that just to bring me to the present? The vampire made a deep humming sound of thought. I would have, if you kept trying to leave. I would need a boost of power in order to continue to hold you in stasis while your mind worked through whatever power you unleashed here. He ignored the second and focused on the first portion of that statement. That didn't go well for the last vampire who tried it. Roderick, and no, it did not. He is too young for one like you, and you are different. Harry slowly stood, testing out his legs for any hint of unsteadiness. Nothing. He was fine. He was fine, and that fact, if anything, disturbed him the most. He should have been collapsed on the floor after the magic done that night. What had gone wrong, or had it gone right? He frowned down at his right hand, the gloves and the stone nowhere to be seen. He pressed one finger into the palm, feeling normal skin and sensation. He took a breath and then another, closing his eyes in a vain attempt at focus. The white altar shone back at him as if marking the attempt. You like different, Harry mused, running his hand through his hair, marveling at the ease of the act. No stone to snag on the strands, no flicker of a black-white power. Was it gone? As long as I have lived, different is the only interesting thing there is. Harry barely heard the vampire. His chest was suddenly tight. He looked down his front, where his left hand had been casually smoothing down his robes, seeking the lost artifact as if it might have transfigured itself back out of him the same way it had sunk into him. And he had found it, only it wasn't out at all. It was most definitely in, somewhere between his second and sixth ribs to be exact, slightly to the left of center mass. He pressed upon the hard surface for the barest second, then was clumsily fumbling with the buttons of his robe and then shirt, teeth gritted in a snarl. Do I want to know? The vampire's murmured question began and ended just as swiftly as the male saw what Harry saw, though he probably saw something much different. Because what Harry saw was the stone, squatting over his heart like a very pleased Kneazle, its black-white claws sunk into the very core of him like his heart was a particularly juicy green mouse. Bastard. Harry grumbled and jerked his shirt back closed. One thing at a time. Deal with the roaming stone later at home with Hermione. Right now, focus on just getting home to Hermione. That was interesting. Brennan mused. Then blue teeth gleamed in a sharp smile. But I'm afraid our time is up. Harry frowned warily as he clasped the last button. What do you mean? The vampire raised his slender hands wide. It seems the cavalry, as it's called, is about to knock down my front door. And as if cued, a loud echoing crash thundered down from the distant hallway, followed by an angry feminine voice. Where in God's name is my fiancé, you vampiric scoundrel? It wasn't the familiar sight of his viola that rounded the corner first. It was streaking yellow, fast and furious. Kraken's magic whipped out from him and lashed towards Brennan with such speed, Harry couldn't even comprehend what sort of spell it was. Brannan flickered from the space he had been standing to another, yellow magic splashing harmlessly against the white altar, proving that even reduced vampiric speed was still superior to that of most other beings. Kraken made a sound like a growl when the vampire had the audacity to laugh, and Harry finally gathered his wits. Stop. His voice echoed in the no longer empty room. Hermione came running around the corner, brown wand lifted high, wearing sparkling purple Grafforn armor. His hit wizard robes, of all things. She certainly was brilliant. Kraken froze, yellow pooling in his palms like poisonous liquid, hissing and spitting sparks of angry magic. More yellow streaks, house elves by the dozen pouring into the room behind Hermione like fluorescent miniature demons, all long limbs and pointed heads. And striding at the end of their number, a familiar slate-grey soul. Hermione had interesting taste in allies when it came time to take on a vampire coven on short notice. Harry ran a hand over his face and tried to not laugh. He really did. But he had had a very long, and yet quite short, sequence of stressful events that night. He snorted, then coughed, then looked towards the gleaming ceiling, wards still perfectly unharmed, which probably meant they had managed to slip through them somehow. House elves. Harry's voice was perhaps a little too high. Hermione was not even a little amused. She was as tense as he had ever seen her, and anger threaded through her voice on a low, malicious wave. Who better to break into a house with? He looked back at a swirling blue-violet light, then to the grey wizard who sauntered up beside her. And Lord Malfoy. Hermione kept her wand, pointed toward where Brennan had casually sat on the altar's steps as she spoke. I needed house elves, and a devious mind not heavily burdened by fear or ethics. Malfoy rapped a short wizard's cane onto the stone floor and laughed. "Why, Granger, I never expected a compliment from you." She tossed her hair and nearly yelled through gritted teeth. "Harry James, Potter, you better explain what is going on here before I do to you what I had planned to do to that despicable blood-sucking vampire." Harry noticed with some surprise that the house elves had fanned out into a rough defensive pattern, all sternly focused on their vampire target, all holding themselves ready. They were trained, and he knew fairly well who would be responsible for training house elves to fight away from the eager watching eyes of the populace and the ministry. "Also, she's paying us by the hour, and we are not cheap," Malfoy pointed out casually. "That explains that." "I'm fine," Harry began. "I'm not harmed, and I finished what I needed to do. We can go. I'll explain everything at home." Brennan rose, and Harry did not miss how every light in the room opposite them pulsed with agitation. Even Malfoy, as casual as he had sounded, had a racing heart. Perhaps he, of anyone, would know stories of what happened to those who crossed the darker creatures of the wizarding world. "I formally apologize for any distress I might have caused you, Miss Granger. You shall be overly reimbursed for any expense you accrued this night. My coven owes a debt, and we shall repay." The last words had the spark of magic to them, and Harry saw the altar echo them, a purr that sent shivers down his spine. "We shall repay." "Fine," Hermione snapped. "But you are not welcome in my house ever again." When Harry began to open his mouth to object, she spoke right over him. "Swear it on your coven." "I solemnly swear to never enter a residence you consider home, on the blood of my coven," Brennan said solemnly, with no hesitation, and again magic wove through the words. Harry fought down his anger at the gesture. "That wasn't necessary." "Yes, it was," Hermione said firmly. "He took you from our home without asking first. Without me, he betrayed our trust, and no matter what the motive or how well it might have ended, I will not welcome him inside our wards again. I've already removed his signature from the scheme. It's done." She was fuming, and he knew it was useless to push the issue at that moment. Instead, he faced Brennan's sapphire blue soul and bowed formally. "Our deal is done," Harry said quietly, mindful of the listening ears. "I hope you and yours are satisfied." "We are," Brennan replied, and once again the altar rumbled with the magic of the coven, a bestial echo. "Though I do not doubt word of this night will reach the ears of other countries. I offer to be your emissary to them when they arrive. There have been rumors of conflict between factions. They are not all as open as I am to outsiders." "Not if, when." Harry pressed his lips together firmly, very aware of how unhappy Hermione was with both him and most certainly the vampire she had just had swear an oath to never enter their house. Still, he knew very few vampires personally, and had learned more than enough of them academically to gain a healthy respect for their abilities. Brennan, despite what Hermione said, he found himself trusting. "I would appreciate it, thank you." The vampire bowed, and Harry turned, walking past a visibly trembling Hermione, her magic a roiling storm of ferocious anger. Kraken appeared in front of him, yellow magic still pooled in fists, heads swiveling at every angle as they exited the corridor to the outside. The door was nothing but shattered red and green splinters, frayed magic hanging limply on the frame like tattered fur. He stepped carefully over the colors and outside, where he encountered yet another surprise. Hermione passed him where he had paused, walking up to Fallen where the grey-green wizard waited at the head of a dozen of Clifton's muggle-born security people, most of whom he recognized by their color. "I'm going home," she announced, noticeably to her personal guard, and not to Harry, before a loud crack and a swirl of magic took her away. Fallen slowly began to relax, voice rueful. "I guess that means we aren't dying today." A few nervous chuckles sounded behind him. Harry felt a headache growing behind his eyes, a dull, thudding ache he tried to rub with stiff fingers. "Who else did she call?" he asked, to no one in particular. Malfoy clapped him on the shoulder. "Well, your man, that other Exora, is currently at Nan Mordia with the werewolves, but they aren't as organized yet as I am. Weren't going to get here for another hour. But she wanted in as soon as day broke, and we were relatively certain any vampires would be weakened." The ache grew worse. "And the ministry?" Harry asked hopefully. "Clueless, as always." Harry slumped at Malfoy's answer. Thank Merlin for small blessings, or not. He glimpsed familiar color upon a nearby rooftop, and knowing what to look for, closed his eyes and scanned the area without moving an inch. He counted 8, 2 teams of hit wizards, owl and dragon if he wasn't mistaken. Scrimgeour wasn't clueless in the least. Harry opened his eyes and looked at Fallen, his own magic highlighting the worried emotion there. Call everyone off, will you? Apologize for inconvenience. Pay who needs to be paid. I've got to deal with other things. He saw Fallen's face twist in a smirk and knew the older man was aware of just what things he was going to have to deal with and how much groveling was probably involved. The man was married, after all. Will do, Lord Potter. May I say, I hope I never piss off Miss Granger. Harry snorted and turned away. That was a rhetorical statement if he had ever heard one. He walked over to Malfoy, who was kneeling beside his elves and speaking softly. One by one, they began to vanish with a distinct pop. I see you've opened a new line of specialty, Harry said when Malfoy rose and turned to face him. The cracks upon his slate-grey soul were still visible, and yet their presence did not bother him as it had before. They were a mark of a hard life, of struggle, but also strength and perseverance. This was a man who had not broken. Never underestimate a house elf, was the other's response. They are capable of much more than most expect. I see that. Still, vampires? Harry questioned. Malfoy grinned, showing off shining grey teeth. My father had many different guests in his house, and not all were welcome. Darby once restrained one blood-mad entity for an entire hour with a broom handle and an enhanced set of silver armor. It had been trying to eat me, and my father hadn't been home to stop it. Harry looked down at where Kraken stood, stiff and silent at his side, eyes focused on Malfoy with single-minded intensity. Your father wasn't a good man. Harry didn't mention the vampire's goodness or lack thereof. He had felt a sane vampire's hunger inside himself and knew a sliver of that drive to consume and drink, consume and drink. He wasn't a good father either, Malfoy said simply. But he was still mine. We only get one. I apologize for any disrespect. Harry said automatically, mindful of pureblood protocol. Family was sacred, even to those currently out of favor in the courts. Malfoy inclined his chin. I'll owe you my bill. Thank you for helping her, Harry said softly. You could have said no. The other wizard laughed. She knocked on my door after midnight and demanded I loan her the elves she knew I had been training in combat, or she was going to write a letter to the Daily Prophet telling them all about my evil schemes. I think she would have done it too. Saying no would have been bad for business. Harry felt himself flush, shook his head. He couldn't find the words to apologize, wasn't even sure if he should. Plus, Hermione never would have actually written a letter of that sort. She was probably happy the elves were learning to defend themselves. It was another step towards independence from wizards. Good luck, Lord Potter. Malfoy grinned again, and with a loud sound, vanished. Harry closed his eyes and stood there a moment, alone with his house. Elf, and yet not alone at all. On the roofs, he could see the hit wizards watching still, cataloguing every move he made. The Ministry would put together the pieces of what happened this night. And when vampires stopped needing a large blood supply in Great Britain, there would be questions that demanded answers, probably from the Wisengamot itself. What Brennan had said about factions of vampires worried him. He would have to be proactive. Kraken, take me home, he finally said softly, and felt a small, warm hand slip into his own. Then familiar yellow magic rose to gently bring him home.